Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting of our instruction group to order. By public comment from Martha. You talking there?
Sorry. Your fault. It's happening. You're good. Don't mind me.
Okay, I was gonna talk loudly today. My name is Martha Saravo. Thanks for having me here. I wanted to stop in today to talk a little bit about the superintendent job profile that is out there currently, and for the board members to consider what is on there and maybe what's missing. So going through it, I had several instances I got to be part of the superintendent search. I did a one-on-one. They reached out to me and the parent directly, just from the different involvement of the committees that we've been part of. I also met with Manton Mamas, which that I represent here in Madison. I also got to listen in on the one for SEAC, which is a Special Education Advisory Council. And then I also got to listen in and be part of a public comment for one that was over at Memorial High School, which was very colorful. But I really got a little bit of conversation on all sides, and I also wanted to see what my comments were going to be in the public setting as well. In that, I don't see where we're asking for special education to be part of the priority factor of our new superintendent. The literal word special education doesn't exist at all in the job profile. And when I was looking through this, the term disabled students or our disabled scholars, students with disabilities is also listed once under a generic place where we're putting all students under there. And particularly, and this may be just be a little bit personal on my end, when I'm reading the first part of here, when we're referring to students with special needs from a group that we hired to make sure that we're including people under meaningful conversation and not just special needs categories, I find that kind of insulting. Because students with disabilities is much more of an appropriate way to refer to our scholars in there. And that's literally in the first paragraph that we have here of what the job profile says. And I spent a lot of time listening to community members myself. I work with a lot of families, and I think we're just missing an extra piece of what our expectations are going forward. It's huge. Special education, we have to think about inclusivity, legal requirements, individualized support, improved outcome, equity and access, data-driven decision-making. All that's included in it, but we also need to be very specific about that particular lens. It requires someone who has a lot of background in it and who knows how to talk about it within the community. Thank you.
Thank you. I move to approve the minutes from the instruction work group meeting dated October 2nd, 2023.
Second, Maya.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any objections? Abstentions? Opposed? Motion carries. Nikki, are you voting in favor of the minutes? Okay. Motion carries 6-0. I'm sure most of you have observed by now that we have a pretty full house this evening. I'm really excited that we get to have a conversation that allows for us to focus on elementary and middle school literacy, and that we get to hear from the people who are doing this work with our young people in our classrooms across our district. So I wanna turn it over to Cindy Green, and she'll bring us through our update.
Thank you so much, Board Chair Muldrow. Jesse, would you mind pulling up the slide deck? Before I get started, I just want to remind the board that back in August, when we were going through our calendar for the year and thinking about the top of construction work group, one thing was very clear for board members was wanting to hear directly from those staff that are teaching literacy, those staff that are implementing our new curriculum. We heard you. We're super excited tonight to be able to have a few people speak. I want to just introduce who's around the table and then I'll go into some additional slides. So we have a few teachers from the elementary side of the house. So we have Becky Christie, who is over at Orchard Ridge. We have Jillian and Grace, who are kindergarten teachers in DLI over at Henderson. We have Dr. Dobby Bell, who serves in our Literacy by Literacy director. We have our relatively new executive director of curriculum and instruction, Becky Kundert. Then on the secondary side, we have Mary Jankovic, who leads the secondary curriculum and instruction. We have Mark and Kelly, who are over at Toki. Mark's an instructional coach, cross-categorical teacher. We have Alex Thompson, principal at Sherman, who's walking in right now. And we also have Nina Hernandez, who supports ELI. So we have quite a few people here to be able to share experiences. Jesse, could you go to the next slide? We are always grounded in our strategic framework goals, and I hope tonight how we define these goals. Next slide. And our core values. Next slide. One of the things as Board Chair Mulder and I have discussed, we wanted to try and create a space that becomes more about thought partnership between the board and administration. So tonight, we're looking forward to having that dialogue in a more authentic way, hearing straight from the classroom teachers, how things are going, the realities of how things are going. We heard also that we want to make sure that we aren't just celebrating all the wonderful things, which are important, but also naming some of the areas. I also want to recognize that tonight brings a few perspectives to the table, but it is not everybody's perspective. So I think that is really important to take into consideration as well. Try to get a diverse group, both in terms of program types, schools, roles, but it is not every perspective. We are also going to have a chance to talk about some of our secondary work as a minor around where we are with early college course. Next slide, please. And a reminder, we talked about this in September, but this year we're really grounded in both district improvement as well as school improvement and ensuring those are aligned. These are our focus areas for this year. Next slide, please. And one of the other things that we've been really focused on is this idea of improvement science and thinking about how do we improve and the ways that we are focused on improvement. And our school improvement plan this year is really driven around. So we're focusing on our district improvement goals, the core principles of improvement science, and really working on data literacy across our entire system. How are we thinking about what data we use when, and how are we building the capacity of all of our staff around that? I think when you hear from our staff tonight, you'll hear some of how they're thinking about improvement in their own practices. Next slide. And so for tonight's presentation, we really want to focus on get better at getting better. And that's kind of what our mantra is for this year. So we have an alignment to our framework. I already mentioned our district goals that we're focused on while schools are working on improvement. We as a system are trying to focus on those same set of goals, really showing how we enact the improvement science through our routines, so rituals and routines, data routines, teaming structures, all of that in a disciplined way of working is how we are focused this year. And you'll see that in the work of literacy. Next slide, please. And so this is our current reality, our current state. We can't talk about literacy without knowing where we are as a system. As a board and as a community, you've seen our data before, but we wanted to just, we wanted to just. Okay. We wanted to just, I think you have to do the exit. Okay. I wanna keep, we wanted to make sure. that we were all grounded in our current reality. You got it? Okay, perfect. And where we are around our students meeting proficiency rates as it relates to our state required assessment. At K-8, we focus on the forward exam. And the data here for both elementary and middle school shows that we are at about a 38% proficiency rate. And over the last 5 years, looked at this data, we see that there is a slight decline at elementary level. One of our root causes is we believe it's an implementation dip, but we also know that we are not where we need to be. At middle school, we've made some progress and we're excited about that. And obviously the goal is to continue to improve, not just for all students, but for our student groups as well. And we also wanted to just uplift where our English learners are. For elementary, 18% of our English learners are meeting proficiency rates in literacy. And at middle school, 21% proficiency rates. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it over to Becky Kundert again, who is the Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction. She's going to talk about the program types we have, because I think that's important and grounding for tonight's conversation.
Thanks, Cindy. So we wanted to be able to share with you, we obviously have multiple program types in Madison that we have to be planful for. And as we were taking this journey in science-based reading and literacy practices, we knew that we had to be planful starting with our elementary students, and this year shifting to also our middle school. And so on the table, you will see that we have listed out for you to be very clear in implementation. We have our Hmong Heritage Program, which is currently up in 6th grade, right? So we are kindergarten through 6th grade. We are in year 2 of implementation at the elementary level. And year 1 implementation for all literacy types. So you'll see Hmong Heritage in the first column, you'll see DLI and DBE in the second, and then English Language Arts or English Language Instruction in the third. So for elementary, of course, you know, we're entering year 2. We actually fondly call it year 1 because last year was the year of unpacking the boxes. And we all know what that's like, right? Like teachers had gathered a very robust materials that came to their schools and didn't come necessarily until you were opening your doors and welcoming students last year. So this year really feels like an official year 1 where we're talking about pacing and being on track together as a district. And then for middle school, as you know, this year is maybe the year of unpacking the boxes for middle school in full transparency. So our core instructional resources are listed up there. Our Hmong Heritage Program is the most complex for us because we know, as many of us know in the room, that there is not a lot of materials out there in Hmong. So we have people in our district that are currently working on developing Hmong materials, translating, and also working to combine, we're trying to talk to other districts around that have that as well, which is not in Wisconsin, in full transparency. So partnering with other states. And then that is gone through 6th grade for us at the middle school level. And then for our DLI DBE program at the elementary level, where you'll hear some people today speak, they are using Benchmark Advance and Benchmark Adelante, which for them is our district has also kind of taken those materials and created those resources and adjusted them to match our 50-50 model that the district has. So we aren't just taking the curricular materials that came from Adelante or Advance and utilizing them. We had to kind of do some background work to make sure that they were in a 50 model. And then also at middle school, there was actually nobody out there who had curricular middle school materials for DLI DBE. So in full transparency, we have Savas, who is currently working on developing those materials now for our middle school programs. And then for English language instruction at K-8, we are using EL Education, which I think many of you are probably pretty well versed in and have heard about throughout the district as well. Next slide, please. So we wanted to lift up for you demographics because we knew that some of you had asked specifically about who was enrolled in the different program types. So I'll pause so you can just look to see kind of who is enrolled in different sections. This table is a little bit different in that it starts with English language programs, goes to dual language, and then Hmong in the last column. So while we were really thinking about what is a great way to honor the work that's happening in schools, and the best way to do that is for you to actually hear from the people that have their boots on the ground, that are with students on a day-to-day basis. And so as we today move into this, if you could go to the next slide, we are going to hear from Becky Christie, who is a first grade teacher at Orchard Ridge. Orchard Ridge is entering its 3rd year of implementation. And then we will be hearing from Grace and Jillian at Henderson, who are entering their 2nd year for DLI for Benchmark Advance and Adelante. All right, Becky.
So I feel super fortunate to be in a 3rd year because it makes a world of difference in terms of the comfort level in the classroom. But last year at year 2 was where we really saw like, wow, this is working. Our students are using academic language, which is one of our big district goals. They're actually taking what we say, and I can give a perfect example of this from today. I asked, what are you doing to become a more proficient reader? And all kinds of answers came out. I'm more focused, I'm doing my independent work, I'm sounding out my words, but they understood the word proficient. And so when we use that academic language and then they can reply with an answer it's pretty empowering. Our kids are excited about the independent work they're doing, and that usually is a battle. We do a lesson and then it's time to go work. They're begging, when can we start our independent work? When can I go get my work done? That's pretty exciting as a first grade teacher to see kids who want to go get jobs done. They're understanding the meaning of high quality. So when I say to them, I want high quality work, they know high quality. Oh, I should go back and check. I should go back and revise. I use my best handwriting. I can help a friend. We can make sure that our work is what we're looking for in the end. They're using explicitly taught spelling rules, and for me, that's like my wheelhouse. Like that, I love. Not all kids need explicitly taught spelling rules. Most of you probably don't even know why you spell words a certain way. It's just something you've internalized. But for our learners who really don't know how to internalize that, it's exciting to see them be able to go back and say, oh yeah, I use CK at the end of a 1-syllable word with a short vowel. So having them know the rules and be able to repeat that while they're working is something that this program is providing. It's very aligned with letters. So our science of reading with EL is aligned with letters. And I know we were just saying, I said, I don't want to throw fellow colleagues under the bus because I know there's been a lot of complaining about completing letters. As we got further into the letters training really does match up with this new curriculum. And it sets the bar really high. It's setting the bar high for all of our learners, and we're having for all learners and really helping them build some capacity. Some challenges for our implementation have been around not having enough time. And on that, I mean the teacher end. It takes a lot to dig into a new curriculum, and that can be hard until year 3. My colleague and I, and my teammate and I are finally feeling like, wow, I'm ready for tomorrow. Now I can dig into some of the other stuff that I need to do with small groups. We're not having to plan lessons. The lessons are there and they're good. So what we can spend our time on is the small group work and the differentiation for our learners. Another challenge is that our facilitators have not always had the background in the areas they're trying to coach us in. An example, last year we had a middle school facilitator coming to try to teach 2nd grade teachers how to use a brand new curriculum. That doesn't really work. Luckily, we had some 2nd grade teachers who were able to step up because they were in year 2. So we want to be real careful that when our people are coming to facilitate from outside our district, that they are prepared to help teach our teachers and help them move forward. Thinking about the future, class size is critical. And I know that has been something that's been on the board, like every time we meet, every time there's a large group, every time MCI comes, class size comes up, but it's critical. I had a class of 15 last year. I have a class of 20 this year. 5 shouldn't make that big a difference. It does. It changes the amount of time I can spend with a small group. It changes the amount of time that I have for planning for my small groups. It changes the amount of time I have to get around the room and help individual learners. And when we're talking about kids on far ends of the spectrum in terms of what they need for differentiation, 5 kids makes a big difference. We have class sizes of up to 24, 26 in our older grades, and it's really hard to implement an all block system when your class sizes are getting too large. Integrity of teaching, that's just something that we're gonna have to work on as a staff, because it is hard. It is hard to pick up a new curriculum. It is really hard to start something brand new. But I really firmly believe in this program and I wouldn't be here speaking, I wouldn't have come if I didn't. I think that it is exactly where our kids are at. It is what they need. And we finally have a program at the K level that's providing the building blocks for what kids need moving forward. I guess the other thing is decodable readers, and I know I brought this up with both of you, but we need books. If we're gonna pick up a new curriculum program, there's things that we realize along the way, and so thinking about the future, we need the books that align with the curriculum. Decodable readers are very different than what we have in our book rooms now. But thinking about where that funding might come from or what that might look like as we look into getting more books for our scholars. And that little baby, I'm sorry, I gotta point her out. She caught me in the hall this morning and she said to me, Miss Christie, how are you? Now my day is made. She grew 8 microphases last year. She came in not knowing her letters and sounds, and I firmly believe because of this program that she grew as a scholar, but 8 microphases through EL, that's like 2 years worth of growth almost.
Wow. That's amazing.
Sorry, I had to call her out.
Anyway, I put her picture in there. Thanks, Becky. Jillian and Grace, do you wanna up to the next slide, please?
So hearing Becky talk about the third year gets me excited for the third year. We're gonna stay in the moment. So what is going well, this year, we're out of our unpacking the boxes phase. We know what to do with the curriculum we have, which is super helpful. We're not looking for things. We have a system in our school for the booklets we use, where they are. The curriculum materials for our phonics block that the district has graciously made for us are aligning in both languages, which is a huge part of our teaching. And it was a big lift last year, and to know and when we talk to have that like cohesive planning is super important, especially in a model where it's 50-50.
There is definitely higher engagement, because we're seeing a lot of the similar materials in both classrooms. For example, Jillian will start with reading and I'm starting with writing, but they are reading in English, in the English setting. And for me, they are writing in Spanish, what they have read in the English.
So they're building language in both classrooms, and our non-native English speakers are able to pull the vocabulary from the room where they're speaking with Grace. In the writing, they're able to use that, and then when I teach a new word, that cross-linguistic transfer, which is a huge piece of the whole DLI program. As Grace mentioned, there's higher engagement. In kindergarten, we need to go boom, 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 like new activity. I know some colleagues of ours are finding that to be really difficult in the older grades. And so I just want to make sure, we are loving it in kindergarten, but just making sure there are other perspectives. Anything else? Challenges. In terms of challenges, there's an online platform that came with Benchmark. It is really hard for kindergartners to use. Really, really hard. So we stick with Lexia and Smarty Ants, which is awesome that we have that again this year. Timing, as I think Becky mentioned, it's always a struggle, and figuring that out. And with all those different moving pieces of it, remembering each day, like, this is what I gotta do, this is what I gotta do. We actually, our coach made us a beautiful thing where we can kind of script out what we do each day. So that's been really helpful to have that scaffold for us. Looking ahead to the future, again, I'm excited for what you're talking about. And just familiarity with the curriculum, and then also hopefully some more professional development days where we can connect with other grade levels, because we do love it. We do love building that foundation with kindergartners. We want to continue that. So having that connectedness to other grades would be super helpful.
Yeah. And overall, just more time to like engage and reflect and then adjust, just to help us grow as teachers and help our students as well.
Thank you.
Jessica, can you go to the next slide? We're gonna transition to middle school now.
All right, Mary Jankovich here for secondary, and we are in the phase of unpacking boxes, as Becky had indicated. However, I do wanna give this time to give some shout outs. So building leaders, building services, coaches and staff. As you can well imagine, when all the materials came from both EL or Open Up and Savas, right? Some schools got a lot of materials and some schools got minimal materials. So we spent the 2 weeks before school started really going out and assessing each building and putting labels on things and moving things between schools. And I just have to say that building services and our custodial staff and our building leaders, our coaches, our staff, they were also wonderful about helping us do that. Because as you can imagine, that was a little bit of a tension for a little bit, but we survived. So we've got some really excited professional learning that is happening between the two implementations that we're really excited about. Obviously, we continue with the science of reading through letters, as we know our K-5 people have just raised. We have our material implementation, but one thing that we really wanted to make sure that happened at the middle school level was we had an opportunity for both sets of our vendors to come in and receive professional development, where principals got a day with the vendors to really go through a lot of the modules, the high level leverage items, and then ask questions. We had the next day followed, and again, this was prior to Welcome Back, the next day followed by coaches coming and be able to follow through the same process. So by the time we had Welcome Back, where all staff were then receiving the professional development, our principals, our coaches were already kind of a day in or already had that learning. So we were super excited about that. We've also taken Roll Alike, where we've done cross-school collaboration. So we have schools that have feeder patterns to the east, La Follette, West, and Memorial, and they're all coming together to unpack the next level of modules. So they're getting that cross-school collaboration. In addition to that, we took October 20th, our first kind of all-school PD, and did the same thing. So teachers or staff are getting the opportunity to have that cross-school collaboration, talk and unpack assessments, unpack the next modules. I don't want to take too much magic away, so can we go to the next slide? And I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Mansky, who is a CC teacher joining us from Toki.
Hello, I'm coming to Toki from the box. Some celebrations that we've been seeing, 6th grade students are reading Percy Jackson. The students are super engaged in the text. They love reading about Percy, they love hearing about Percy's adventures, and they're really interested in the Greek mythology aspect of it as well. So that has been a real source of engagement throughout the school year so far. We just wrote our first essay of the school year, and students did a really awesome job. I have been at Toki since 2019, and I can't remember a year where students had written a multi-paragraph essay this early in the school year, and done such an awesome job at it, using evidence and doing analysis of that evidence was really great. Building off of what Becky mentioned before, I've noticed that students have really internalized and sort of generalized this idea of like the habits of character, and I hear them talking about the habits of character. For example, in crew, when we're doing social contract things, like students will say like, oh, well, that's not showing integrity. And that is, really, really heartening to hear, especially from kids who don't, middle schoolers don't always have the most integrity. So that's a great thing to hear. The mid-unit assessments have been rigorous, but really engaging. We've, I think, done 4 assessments already this year, and students have had a really positive attitude about them. They're really interested in the vocabulary aspect and like really like understanding vocab words, which has been really great. Challenges, sort of building off of what everyone else has been saying, preparing materials has just been extremely time consuming. We meet daily. We have our, sacred planning time once a week, but we really meet daily, and it's been really hard to get ahead. We're usually just planned like 1 or 2 days in advance, which can be stressful. Making the anchor charts and having the anchor charts prepared has also been a source of, a lot of planning time. Something that I've noticed as a CC teacher is that the Yale curriculum doesn't have a ton of specific like strategies for students to internalize and build off of. So it's like It seems to me that sometimes the curriculum just assumes that students will have these skills, so it'll say like, they have to write a just statement, and it's like, okay, well, maybe like 5 kids know how to write a just statement, but like everyone else, we need to come up with a strategy that we can use to consistently write effective just statements. And so like, that's just another like piece of the planning puzzle. It's like, you have to think about what strategy you're gonna use to teach that skill. The last one is just really the pacing piece. We just started Q2 and we started unit 3 of module 1 last week. And I know that the hope is that students are wrapping up and starting module 2 by the end of Q1, and that's just not really been feasible for us. We needed to spend about two weeks to work on our essay to make sure that students were able to include all of the necessary parts. And that was definitely like more than the curriculum sort of recommended. But trying to balance like moving through content efficiently while also being like, well, it's actually like really important that you know how to write an intro at the end of this quarter. So really like trying to balance the speed and the pacing with the skills that we want students to really internalize and learn. As far as the future, the pacing piece has just been sort of the most on my mind. I think we're on track to Jackson by the Thanksgiving, which would mean that we're starting to late November, early December, and if it's taking 12 weeks, then we're almost definitely not going to be able to get to module 4 this school year, which is concerning, but that's sort of where.
Thank you, Kelly. Next slide, please. So we have 3 wonderful individuals that are going to speak to you about different aspects. So we're going to start with Mark Siegel, the instructional coach.
Thanks. I think first of all, one of the celebrations and the biggest one that I'm able to see from the coach's lens is the work that staff have put in. Late April, when the board chose EL for the curriculum, the next day, staff were already asking, how can we start to look at it? So that last month in May, beginning of June, before the school year ended, in pretty much every school, staff were already putting the work in to unpack the curriculum. What can we already do to get ahead? And when Mary talked about welcome back and the professional development that was there for them, for a large number of teachers, they'd already put in work at the end of the year over the summer, reading all of the core texts for all 4 modules, taking a look at module 1, which was coming up in first quarter. So that work that staff have been putting in has really been evident. It's great to see, but it also takes time. It's that collaboration piece that teams are doing together. Kelly talked about it. And it kind of goes hand in hand with the challenge, at least that we're seeing at the middle school level, of staffing where it's at and the need to cover classes and what that looks like during planning time. And how that affects staff's ability to look at what's coming up, break down mid-unit, end of unit assessments to really internalize what's coming up and how are we going to best support students for that. That collaboration time is essential. And we've had it with Roll Alike, and then in our October professional development, getting all of ELA teachers, CC teachers, BRTs, coaches together is just a really important time, and staff are really putting in that work. So that's one of the biggest celebrations that I've seen from that. Also, putting the work into scaffold and support where students are at. In the beginning, we saw what our proficiency levels are at. The curriculum isn't written for 38% proficiency. The rigor that it has, it's hard. And it's great, but it takes a lot of work and time to put in the scaffolds that are appropriate to help students access grade level. text tasks. And I think it's gonna look different in a few years when kids have come through, have done EL in elementary school, and in year 3, you're starting to see that effect. But when they're coming into 6th grade, it's like, okay, we're gonna do gist statements. We haven't had that time and experience with that curriculum years before of having that, and we're able to see from 6th, 7th, and 8th when they're writing their compare and contrast essays, what does scaffolds look like in 6th grade versus 8th grade? But our 8th graders, our 7th graders are coming in without any of that previous work through the curriculum. So the challenges we're seeing with that are gonna look different this next few years. But it does take a lot of work and a lot of collaboration to make sure we're meeting students where they're at and supporting where they're at in order to access that grade level work. Another challenge that we're lucky at Toki that we have 2 regular ed ELA teachers and CC teachers and VRTs who are all part of that planning. In some middle schools, you have a little more siloed, so you only have 1 ELA teacher in a grade level. So there's opportunities for staff to come together, so you don't feel like you're on your own, you're doing it on your own, is really important, and that's been beneficial when looking ahead to assessments, when talking about challenges that we're all facing. So those opportunities to come together are beneficial, especially for schools who staff just are a little more siloed based on their grade level. Looking ahead to the future, I think that it's gonna feel different as kids are coming up. The work that they're getting in All Block is amazing at that elementary level. Middle school doesn't have that. And so the work that we need to do at middle school in order to make sure our win time, our extension time is really also focusing on those foundational skills to meet students where they're at, similar to what All Block is doing, is gonna be something that I really hope that we have for the future. Because there's a lot of areas that we need to and we can support literacy with our students that we're currently not doing based on where our systems are at.
Thank you so much, Mark. All right, I'd like to introduce Nina Hernandez. She comes to us from central office and she is a DLI teacher leader.
Thank you. Hello, everybody, having me here. As I listen to Mark, I feel in a way, in a very ironic way, a little bit reassured because a lot of the same things that you're expressing with your program, it's what our teachers are experiencing with our DLI implementation. So as you know, I think this is the first time that we're actually adopting a curriculum across schools. And it's the first time that we have the opportunity to support teachers in that way all at once. With all the good that that brings, right? Opportunities for collaborating among across schools, opportunities to do the role alike, work in teams. So a lot of like promise in the sense that we're going to have all schools more or less at the same level. I would say that something positive has been the fact that the texts are rigorous and it has challenged teachers to rethink ways of getting to teaching the kids to be at grade level. And that the curriculum that we are trying to implement, it's called My Perspective. So it brings a lot of different voices from different venues, and that's really nice. Now with that, well, I want to add also that we enjoy how the program comes with the language components and the word study that reflect what we do in the science of reading too. So that's very positive. So challenges, like Mary said, we're still unpacking the units, and one of the biggest challenges has been that the units are not ready to go, and it was a program that was created for teaching English, but not teaching English and Spanish in the DLI model that we have. So the units are still being adapted. We can't really talk about translations. For those of you who are bilingual, you know how challenging that is. And so we have been running against the clock. I don't know if that's the expression in English, to adapt the text, to trans-adapt and to fix what we have on, with each unit. And that has been very challenging. The other thing is that teachers say, like with every other case, that the kids are not at grade level in terms of their language skills. And so it's still a lot of work to be done before we can get there. And we're hoping that 3 years from now, the kids get used to the way we're doing things, that we will have a lot more texts that are originally in Spanish, written in Spanish, and the text that we need that reflects the kids' experiences and their culture. That's very important. And of course, that we will get used to, or the kids will have learned through all of those scaffolds that we're putting in place. Lots of scaffolding that do not come with the program. And so I would say one of the biggest challenges that we face has to do more than the curriculum per se, which is by itself challenging because it's a new one and we're implementing it. It's not completely trans-adapted or translated. One of the biggest challenges is finding teachers to teach in our programs. The DLI program is always struggling to find teachers, and a good way is to, of course, bring international teachers, which also comes with other challenges. I mean, we're very fortunate to have a big group of teachers, mostly from Colombia. Some of them are still arriving. Some arrived as of last week. And so as you can imagine, having somebody move to a different country to adapt to the culture, to adapt to the educational environment, to find a house, to bring a family, and then to be thrown into this, that is very, very difficult. Some of them are doing really great, but some are really struggling because it's a very tough move. And so I would say, looking ahead, we find it imperative to really invest in programs like Cultural Vistas, to keep bringing international teachers, to keep them with us, to ease the way in which they do their licensing. It's very hard, and I did it 20 years ago, and the hoops that I had to jump just to have a license here, where I can't even, I don't know, you probably went through the same thing, and having to think in English, having to take the board, test in English, and it's a lot. So I would say, in order for a program to work, we need teachers. We need bilingual and bicultural teachers, and we need to really support them. I'm just gonna get that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. All right, and our last person up is Alex Thompson, and he comes to us as the principal of Sherman Middle School.
Mary. First and foremost, I want to make sure that I echo the sentiments that my fellow middle school staff members have said. They have been on point with every point that they brought up. We're a unique school, if you're not familiar with Sherman. We have ELI and we have DLI. So that means that this year that we're implementing both curricula. But I want to start off with some of the positive things that are with adoption of a new curriculum, especially one that's as robust as EL is. There really is a mindset shift that occurs amongst your staff members who are implementing. When I started many years ago in education, I got a list of standards. I got a scope and sequence document that was like maybe a pamphlet. It said good luck. And I had to spend my time finding the resources, figuring out what to teach, how I wanted to teach it, how am I going to best reach these students over here and these students over there. And now we have a program that has a lot of that stuff very well thought out for you. So the mindset changes from what am I going to teach to how am I going to teach it, to whom and why, what's going to be my strategy in the classroom, what's going to be my strategy with planning, and how am I going to assess learning, and what does effective feedback look like for individual students and groups of students. So it's allowed for us to take a whole load off of the plates of teachers per se, and really focus on what's gonna be the most important levers of student learning. You know, the content going there, of course, is very important, but equally important is the pedagogy. And oftentimes we don't give the pedagogy enough tender loving care to do it effectively. And especially with all of the different staff members that we have particular expertise, it's allowed us to have some different conversations than what we would normally have in the past. With also being aligned across schools, there's a shared accountability and responsibility for student learning, opportunity to collaborate across schools and across the district. Haven't before, because what we do at Sherman could be completely different from what's done at Koki. And so those opportunities intersect, they don't necessarily always meet, but now since we're pretty close, at least when it comes to what we're gonna cover for the course of the year, we can align our professional development a lot differently. And it has been helpful to have EL come in and do the grounding work with us over the summer as principals and as the instructional work group for ELA adoption for the middle school level, working with us hand in hand so that we do it the right way. The rigor is much higher than what we've seen in the past. And with that, which is good, it's allowed us to have some very rich conversations around equity. And what does equity look like in an instructional sense? And really being at the forefront of raising or supporting our students to meet the standard instead of lowering the standard for them. We know that that's never conducive to actually closing gaps and actually harms more people than it does good. Because the fact of the matter is we know that when they leave us, we're preparing them for college, career, community. And just because our community chose to create equity in a different way, doesn't mean that the standard is going to change once they get out in the real world. And so we've been able to have those conversations, and it's shifted some mindsets in a good way. But also it's interesting to see teachers collaborate, and our newer teachers are on a level playing field with some of our veteran teachers, at least when it comes to practices, because it's new for everybody. And so the contribution to that conversation and the power dynamic between those teams are more even and more collaborative, because everybody is trying to learn this for the first time. Some of the challenges that have not yet been shared, I want to again echo the sentiments of my fellow middle school staff members. They're spot on. There's never enough time. The planning collaboration is very important, especially when it comes to alignment, even across your school, but across the district. And so having time to do that is incredibly important. One thing particular for at least my school and some of the other schools that have dual language immersion within their school building is that we've now expanded the 2 different silos of learning that we have within our building, because they're 2 different curricula. And so while one group is focusing on EL and the implementation of EL, have another group that's focusing on Savas, and then we have a limited amount of capacity when it comes to being able to instructionally coach both. And so unpacking 2 at one time, especially for a team that's relatively small, is a challenge. And just unpacking Savas as well, you know that we have some very talented instructional coaches in our school district, but not all of them are bilingual. So when we think about instructional coaching, especially on the Savas curriculum, being able to give feedback on the instructional moves that are made in Spanish is a big gap that we are able to close, given how we do this. And last but not least, the continuity. It's one thing to be unpacking the boxes, but the stability of staffing will ensure that we're not unpacking the boxes year after year after year after year. And I would love for this to be the only year that I've got to unpack boxes for a majority of my staff, but we're that's something that we need to take into consideration as well.
Thank you so much.
You go to the next slide, please, Jason. All right, so that was perspectives from our elementary and our middle school. I'm grateful for everyone's share, their experiences and also sharing where we have, opportunities for improvement. So, Board Member Muldrow, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you, Cindy. We're gonna engage in a little bit of a conversation, but I wanted to get us started by asking my fellow board members to really lean into the kind of life in the day of a teacher and use the folks who came here tonight. Because I think what's happened when we've tried to do this before is that we end up having a similar conversation to what we would have if the folks who are in the classroom weren't at the table with us. And so I just want to ask board members, if you can, to direct your questions specifically at our educators. I want to thank you all for bringing both what's going well and what's challenging, and really, you know, being honest and candid with us about the successes and the struggles as you all do this work. And I want to thank you, Cindy, for bringing us some really, you know, interesting data to kind of dig into. I'm gonna try to make my way around to everybody. The board has invested a lot in early literacy and in literacy, and so I'm really excited to have this conversation and really grateful to all of you who worked all day and taught all day, and then decided to come spend your evening with us. So thank you all for being here. I know Nikki has had a question burning since like the first 7 minutes. So Board Member Vandermeulen, it's all you.
Yes, I appreciate it. I have one admin question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have one admin question and then a bunch of teacher questions. Admin question is actually a suggestion. Please de-aggregate the data to include disability on the charts next time, please. That's my only comment that I have on administration. On the teachers, one, thank you for coming. This is an incredible amount of work. I assume you guys volunteered for this, which is wonderful. And I really hope that you get as much out of it as we are getting out of it. I really am interested in the class size piece. I do know of another DLI and Hmong program at Lakeview that currently has 24 students in one first grade classroom and 8 in the other because it's Hmong only. And I can see that that one obviously is having issues. Do you have some of the same issues at, say, Henderson or other schools?
In terms of class sizes. Our DLI classrooms also typically, and you can speak to this, are filled as high as they can go. We each have 18 this year. Our ELA classrooms kind of go back and forth. However, students are not. I'm gonna.
I think you see a bigger adjustment in program types for Hmong heritage because you are talking about only like Hmong language and then also the same for DBE, developmental bilingual, where you then are not with like DLI, which has a 50-50 split around language. And so I think that's where you would find the bigger numbers that I think you're talking about.
Yeah.
Question also on class sizes. You said someone said theirs went up from 15 to like 18. And you said that was more difficult. What can we do as a board to make that adjustment easier? Do we increase the prep time due to larger class sizes? What would be helpful from a teacher point of view?
How long do you have, Nikki?
Yeah, I know, right?
So I went from 15 to 20 and I've typically bounced, I think, since I've been at Orchard Ridge, sort of back and forth between 14 to 20, and it really is cyclical and depends on the year. We had a principal who was very aware that the foundational skills at first grade at K2 was important and really fought to keep our class sizes down and helped helped with our numbers and our percentages. But I think that, I mean, prep time is great, but it's really the in the classroom part. It's the writing, you know, listening to middle school teachers talk about writing multi-paragraph essays, and in first grade, we just finished our first full paragraph with a topic sentence and 3 detail sentences and a conclusion, and that's a lot for a 6-year-old. And I'm one person trying to scramble between 20 kids who are, you know, needing help with a myriad of things. One of the things I had thrown out to both Ms. Kunder and Ms. Green was that a possibility would be like an EA that was assigned to classrooms for their literacy blocks. So that they're familiar with the kids, because it's also really hard when somebody is just coming in and out of a classroom and doesn't know a teaching style, doesn't know how the classroom's functioning, doesn't know the kids in the classroom. You know, what you might come in and see as a problem, I look at as like, wow, like that's not a problem. This is the first day we've been in the class for the whole day. Please don't say anything to them. So I think, you know, looking at potentially an EA, but just mainly keeping those class sizes down. I'm good at what I do, but the more kids I have, I'm stretched.
I have 2 more questions and then I promise, Chair, I will move on. My 2 other questions are, I know that you said that it's on planning time, it's on in the classroom. Do you ever worry that you're not given the freedom to teach? That if it has to be done only in the canned curriculum, does that worry you?
So I think that there's always got to be some teacher autonomy. We had this conversation last week as well. You can have as much autonomy as you have integrity. And so if you know what you are doing and you are planned, then you can have some autonomy to do some different things and really look at like the scaffolding that needs to happen and the differentiation that needs to happen. But I think some of that does fall on teachers. You have to know what you're teaching.
And my last question is, is there a difference between the English version and the Spanish version of the program at 5K?
One is called Adelante and one is called Advance, but they're
very similar.
They're very, very similar. One example of a difference would be the songs that we're singing. On the Spanish side, it's like 1, 2, 3 is it uno, dos, tres, Andres? And on the English side, it's like Benchmark has created the songs.
We're not always learning, for example, like in kindergarten, we strongly focus on letter sounds. We're not always learning the same letter, but many times it does fall into like learning the same letter and the letter sound to be able to like bridge both languages together.
And my very, very last question, I promise, is are you seeing individuals with IEPs being able to keep up with, have enough supports to keep up with the rigorous curriculum?
Nikki, are you asking that at the elementary or middle or for anybody?
Elementary.
Okay, thank you.
Yes and no. We're really trying to push in now rather than pull out. And that has made a huge difference because our cross-cat teachers can help implement and teach. We try to kind of go back and forth at our school where the CC teacher might be doing some of the lead teaching and the lead teacher might be doing some of the CC support, but we try to really blend and flex our small groups for differentiation. So yes, are they meeting our end of year goals? Not necessarily, but are they meeting their IEP goals? Yes.
Thank you. I really appreciate the candor in this. It's absolutely wonderful, Chair. Yeah, that is all my questions.
Thank you, Board Member Vandermeulen. I appreciate your questions. Further discussion from the board? Board Member Simpkin.
Thank you. So this question is for anybody who's in the classroom. I heard loud and clear from several of you that want more time for reflection. You need more time for planning and prepping. And so my question is, how much time do you feel you have now and what would be ideal?
I think with new curriculums, I think Mark said it, someone over there said it, but with new curriculums, it's kind of like a day by day plan. And as teachers, you know, we want to have like that week planned out. And so being in the second year of our curriculum, I see now more like how I can plan ahead. I think that first year was like, we really are day by day planning. Now we're probably like 2 or 3 days now. And so maybe next year it will be a week ahead, but it's hard to give a specific, time frame to it. I think more like a lot of our PD days last year were spent on letters, which was super important, and we are seeing these connections. But we just haven't had a lot of time to like meet with our schools and have like just our schools or, you know, like schools that we're connecting with and talk about what we're seeing grade by grade. And so even just time for that would be super beneficial. Especially for those of us who like the curriculum and want, you know, other people to see the benefits of it as well.
Anybody else want to jump?
Nice to have our planning time. be planned. Just the 90 minutes of planning or whatever it is, would just be nice. It's often not available because of meetings or because of subbing, usually because of subbing. Yeah, just time would be nice.
I would interject, even though I'm not teaching in a classroom, that the level of planning is directly proportional to our staffing levels. Because if you have, say, one teacher who's gone that day, that is 6 classes that you have to cover with someone, and teachers typically have 2 preps per day. So that means it's 3 people minimum who would be then stepping in to teach those courses. And so I think that would be something that could help immediately. They'd automatically have more time and more consistency as well. Wouldn't cancel planning meetings because they don't have enough staff to teach children that day.
So if all of you were in schools that were fully staffed, do you think those 2 periods would be sufficient? I'm thinking about long-term sustainability. Because of how important it is to have time to reflect and to plan. Those are foundational. Is that enough?
I think elementary keeps looking at me, so I'm just gonna speak up.
Yeah.
As you know, the former principal at Orchard Ridge for the last 9 years. So elementary only has 4.5 hours in a week, right? So there's a significant difference for what elementary has for planning time versus middle. As a middle school teacher, right? Like I had 2 periods a day when I was teaching at Sherman. So but we were fully staffed, right? So there's a difference. So I think the fully staffing is always gonna be impact in all schools, but at the elementary, it's 4.5 hours during the course of a week, which is less time than typical. So when it's new, I think that's like, it's been really hard that way for people. Feeling like there's not enough time in that 4.5 hours. And then, of course, they try to do their best to maximize all of that, but like I can tell you, many times, even still now, like I will stop at a school and there's teachers like working and planning and it's like 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock at night, you know, and they've been out for a couple hours. So I think that's tricky. Also, elementary implementation is 2 hours of implementation for literacy, which is also different, I think, than with middle school. Because they have a skills block of time and then a module block or a unit block. So they have the word recognition and the language comprehension piece. So they have 2 hours to implement all the components, where I think at middle school, it's the hour and then often a win block or a skills block if they combined the time. So I think there's like just a mix.
Board Member Simpkin, is it okay with you, if Board Member Mosner
Just
has a
quick clarif. Is 2 hours per day or is that 2 hours over the course of the week? In the EL stuff?
From a middle school?
No, didn't you say?
2 hours?
Oh, every day they have, they have 2 1-hour blocks of time. And I think like Becky wrote to me multiple times, like, the skills block should be 75 minutes, ideally not 60 minutes, right? And so I think there's lots of like pieces where people wish they had more for that, but yes, they have 2-hour blocks at elementary to implement.
Yeah, absolutely. So I appreciate hearing that. My second question is around pacing. So I was hearing that, you know, some of our students aren't ready for the pace that the curriculum is telling us we're supposed to be at. And I'm wondering, as classroom teachers, do you feel like you have the autonomy to slow it down and to make sure that you're going deep and doing that skill building before moving on? Or do you feel like you need to keep going with the pace that is dictated by the curriculum?
Go for it.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say that, the pacing has been an issue, quote unquote, and that as a team, as a biliteracy team in our role likes is something that we refer to and we decide as a group every time we meet. Do we move forward? Do we stay here? We're probably going through the same steps in our next unit, but we're doing it in English instead of doing it in Spanish. And it's always, you know, we're adjusting constantly to do it all together as a group. And I feel that in that sense, it is very positive to have the same curriculum because we can all decide. And our consensus has been that it's better to go deeper, to really learn something well before we move on. But there needs to be a balance.
Does anybody else want to speak to that?
I think one thing that we continually have conversations about in our planning meetings is what is the key skill for each lesson? How is that building towards a mid-unit or end-of-unit assessment? Because we might have 3 or 4 learning targets and skills that we're focusing on within a 45-minute period, but trying to really understand what is that key component of that work time. EL can be written in for middle school, 45-minute lesson. We could spend 5 hours on that lesson and still never get through it. So they continually talk about it as a slippery slope, like, yeah, let's just take this lesson 1 day, 2 days. You can do that with every single lesson. So there's always going to be this mindset of like, oh, we got to keep moving on. We know that the curriculum, the standards that we hit during Q1 with module 1 are going to come back with module 3. But it is hard to walk away from a skill knowing that everyone hasn't gotten there, but we will be coming back to it. So it's this, I feel like it's this constant balance of what is the key skill that we're really going to dive into, because they're going to need that for an essay coming up. They're going to need that for a mid-unit assessment, because we can't do that we can't dive deep into all of the learning targets and skills for every lesson.
And I would say, building off of what Mark was saying with the autonomy piece, is that sometimes when we are planning together and we're looking at, for example, a mid-unit assessment or a task where it has the kids, it's like, it wants you to take 5 minutes for them all to look up a word in the dictionary and write down the definition. We pretty much always skip that because we're just like, that doesn't, like, yes, that's a skill that like kids need, but like, is that really something that we want to dedicate like a chunk of our time together in class to do? Like, so I would say that when it's sort of tasks like that, feel sort of not super purposeful related to those learning targets or those main skills that Mark was talking about, I think we feel pretty comfortable about being like, let's just maybe not do that today. And focus on doing the affix list, the prefix list, the suffixes, and those sorts of things that are more like skill based than like just looking up a word, writing it down in the dictionary.
Okay, I want to thank all of you for coming. I know this isn't the most comfortable room to be in, so thank you for being here, for answering the questions and helping us understand more deeply what's happening in the classrooms. Appreciate it.
Board President Nichols.
Yes, first I want to just start with such gratitude and just heartfelt thank you for really bringing to life what it means to actually adopt something and implement it. I feel like I have much better understanding of what it looked like day to day, week to week, from unpacking the boxes to actually trying to get the lessons planned within a couple of days. So yeah, just Thank you very much. So the first thing I want to ask is I heard a couple of you mention, like, I'm seeing much higher levels of engagement. And I was wondering if you could unpack that a little bit, like, what does that mean exactly? Is it that you see students like leaned into the learning, they're holding attention longer, they're completing some of the tasks, they're enthusiastic? What is like higher levels of engagement mean from your perspective?
So I think at the elementary level, we're divided between content literacy, so thinking more about the reading and the metacognition skills and the actually understanding a book. And then we have our foundational skills or our all block side, which is more of the building block pieces that go along with that. Our literature is higher quality. So one of the things we always talked about with Mondo before when we had elementary was that the books just weren't engaging. And then when we would stop and get a book from the library to read to supplement the curriculum, then the kids would just like, oh,
Okay.
it's a real book. And so
Okay.
we're using real books that are meaningful, and the literature is, it's rich. It's the language in it is complex, and the kids just the illustrations are completely different than what we got out of Mondo.
Okay.
On the foundational skills or the building block side of it, it's where kids are at. So they can lean into it and feel empowered because it's where they're at as a learner. Not that it's not pushing them or it's not rigorous, but it's something that they can take and feel like, wow, I just internalized this and I can do it. And I
Okay.
think that that's what's important, is that they come out of it feeling like I can do this thing that you're trying to teach me, rather than I'm looking around the room and she can do it and she can do it, but nope, like we're over here going, we can't do this, but we can. I was thinking about like goal setting in the classroom. When they set goals now for literacy, I used to kind of always buck the system when it was hopes and dreams, because that felt so elusive. But when we set a goal now for literacy, the kids can say, oh, I need to work on my letters and my sounds. I need to practice my independent work. I need to work with my buddy when I'm doing a math game, whatever it is that we're setting a goal for. They can name the things that we're doing in the classroom that are going to help them reach that goal.
Thank you so much. Others?
Yeah, for us, there is higher engagement because they are seeing the same materials in both classes. And we're building like background knowledge in their native language. Like as I mentioned, like as previous examples, Jillian is writing and I am reading. So as they read in Spanish with me and they shift over to Jillian's class, they're like, oh, I saw this in Marino's class. Yeah, I know what this is. Even if it's not the student's native language, they are still able to make that connection because we talked about it previously in Spanish, and vice versa as well. If it's the English native language, they are able to say, oh, whoa, we're writing about what we just read in Spanish. And so they're making that connection within both classrooms. So as I'm teaching, just seeing their face bright up and be like, oh, I know what you're talking about. We just talked about this a couple hours ago. And just the brightness and the smile on their face keeps them engaged as they're learning.
So, thank you. School.
I think that similar to what Becky was saying, the Percy Jackson book has just been like really enjoyable for students. It has such a unique, funny voice for the main character that a lot of kids really respond to. I also think it's pretty representative of a lot of their lives. Percy is a child with a disability, ADHD. He talks about having a stepfather and not having a great relationship with his stepfather. He loves his mom. He's kind of impetuous and has a bad temper, but he still has these really loyal friends, and he's still really brave and really heroic. And I think that the kids really respond to that. It helps that a lot of them have like seen the movie and like have some prior knowledge about the character and the story. I also think that Greek mythology is just historically like a source of really high engagement for students. This is the first year I've taught Percy Jackson, but we've read myths in the past couple of years about like Pandora's box and Prometheus, and kids are always really interested and engaged in that topic to begin with. And so like dedicating a really like prolonged unit to it. The kids have a lot of investment and interest in that topic. And then seeing it through this kind of like funny book, I think like even heightens the engagement further. I also think that EL does a really good job. I was very intimidated in the summer when we did the training at the Alliant Energy Center about the language dives, and the staff was really emphasizing how key the language dives are to really like internalize the curriculum. Oh my god, this is going really hard. But the kids love the language dives. They love because they get to like draw. So it'll be like the other day, the word was I can't remember. Oh, we were talking about how for their essays, their conclusion talked about how the book makes you feel. And the example sentence was like, it makes you feel strong and powerful. And it was like, okay, show me with your face and your body, like what it feels like to be strong and powerful. And the kids were like, you know, like,
Okay.
like dynamic poses, and they're like drawing like strong arms in their books and like that sort of thing. And I think that that's like, it's just like fun. They're interested in the content, but then also the delivery of it. And of course, not every day is that, but the delivery of it, I think, is a lot of fun as well, where it's like there's room for play, and there's room for joy with the content that they're looking at, that they really respond to.
Yay, that makes my heart sing. That's awesome. Thank you for unpacking that. So as I was listening to you all, I mean, similar to, I think, other board members, I was hearing you talk about what it really takes to implement and to do that well. And what I kept hearing time and time again was like time to plan, time to collaborate, time to be reflective and have the opportunity to adjust. So from my perspective as a board member, when I think about time, I go to the employee handbook. Because I feel like that's a lane that I sit in as a board member. And as I was listening to you all, I was also going to the employee handbook. I was looking at how we have built in time. And I guess what I want to get a sense from you is like, if this isn't working. So right now I see that, and I also want to acknowledge that I also heard the toll of being understaffed is also compromising the time that you would have if you were fully staffed. So I want to acknowledge that. And I do see that there's planning time in theory built into the week. There's the early release Mondays, which should ideally provide some opportunity for grade level content teams to connect. And then there's another category for SIP aligned activities, which to me, it feels like from the opening diagram that we saw, all of the literacy work and biliteracy work is SIP aligned. I don't know if that's what we mean in the handbook. So given the time that is in writing in the handbook, and considering that I heard you all say that you still don't have enough, I guess I'm wondering, like, is there something about either the way we're thinking about planning time, early release Mondays, or SIP aligned activities that should be adjusted during the first year, the first 2 years of implementing a brand new curriculum? Like, I'm just trying to think of like, and I'm not saying you can respond and know that you know, you're not necessarily on the hook for any of it. It's just, I'm trying to get a better sense of like, how do we adjust? How can we as board members support implementation well? And if time and collaboration is a big part of it, and we've already have something in the handbook, but it's not enough, like, what else could we consider?
So thinking about when you just mentioned the Mondays, so 2 Mondays a month are typically staff meetings. And yes, it's early release, but by the time a lot of our kids get picked up, you have maybe 10 minutes to race back clean up a little bit of your room, whatever, race up to your meeting, and then by the time you get out of your meeting back downstairs, you're probably 10 minutes before, I don't, contractual end of day. I think at the elementary level too, even though we have that hour of specials time, by the time we get our kids to specials, drop them off, and then catch the runner that decided that PE was not the thing for that day. I mean, it is what it is. Our kids respond better to us than they do to us making a behavior call. And if we don't handle it, then when we go back to the room, we gotta handle it again anyway. So that time, I mean, it's elusive, and yeah, there's times where I can shut the door and do that with my teammate, but there's also times where that's just not realistic.
Okay.
Knowing that students have needs that don't fit in a block of time. I would also venture to say that just because a curriculum has been adopted and been in place, our kids change from year to year. And so the differentiation that needs to happen, and my teammate and I are still in year 3 going, oh my gosh, like this makes so much more sense, but let's try this year, because I think this is based on last year, this is gonna work better, and then we're replanning anyway. So it's not just, oh, look, we had this curriculum, we figured it all out, and now we're plowing back through because it's easy this year.
I see a lot of head nods. Are there some other?
I was just gonna ask Alex, from a principal perspective, also important, because he.
Yeah, I have a question for Alex as well.
I think just a perspective.
Well, I would say that every minute we get a PD, we use it. It's part of the reason why I came a little bit late. Is because that time is precious, and there's a level of protected time for collaboration, but we also have to have time to build capacity as well. And that's been the delicate balance of building leadership, is how do you provide both? But I don't know what that magic number would be. I think that'll always be a moving target in my mind. I think that if we were, I think that we need to start with what we have on the books and see if we are actually realizing the amount of planning time that we have contractually for various reasons. And when I say significant, if you have, like, I gave the example if you had one person out. There are a lot of days where we would pray that we only have one person out. Because when we add in, there's buildings that are, we're staffed on paper, but COVID will hit, and then that person will be out for a week. And so we're going through and adjusting and doing what we need to, but that oftentimes those things don't happen with one person. You get COVID, you got 6 people that are down, and you don't always get people to come back in and backfill. And so that's where the work gets pushed around a bit.
Okay.
Because you always start with prioritizing the students that are in front of you and make sure that they have what they need in the moment. And it takes away from that planning collaboration on the back end too, to make sure that you're proactive about the course that you have in place for students. So it's hard for me to judge without having that solidified, because I don't think that we've given it a real true full go at it since we come back from COVID.
Wow. Can I ask that from a principal perspective? Thank you for that. So you have a school improvement plan, which means you have a goal and some strategies articulated around literacy by literacy improvement, because it's school improvement, right? And then you're hearing, or you're observing, and you're witnessing, gosh, staff just doesn't have enough time to collaborate, and we're short-staffed, and people are covering and losing planning time and all this stuff. From a continuous improvement perspective, like, how do you adjust as a principal about what you think can be achieved? I know we're just hitting the beginning of second quarter, but it seems like at some point, just as I was listening to Miss Mansky about, we were supposed to get to this module by this point, we're still here, but we're doing what we need to do. Like, at some point, you kind of have a bit of a reality check, it sounds like, around how far, how fast we can go. And I'm just wondering how that gets reflected in your school improvement plan quarter to quarter.
Oh, we reflect a lot more often than even quarter to quarter.
Okay,
We have facilitated meetings with instructional coaches every other week. And so we're really trying to work with our staff to manage the pacing
okay,
and prioritize, you know, as Mark was saying, prioritize what are the things that we absolutely need to do? And what are the things that we would like to do if we have the time?
okay,
Especially as we go through unpacking a new curriculum. I use the analogy with my staff members the other day, is that if I go out to dinner and I pay $100 for a steak, I don't want to cook it. And so if it comes back, I ordered medium and they give me a rare steak, I'm gonna go back to the chef and say, I need you to finish cooking this, it is incomplete. And that's the state we're in. And so they understand that they're gonna have support. They're gonna have understanding because as a principal, I'm only gonna be as strong as my teachers are.
yeah,
And supporting them to be the best version of themselves is paramount to what we do. And so if I'm putting them in a position where they can't be the best version of themselves, then we're gonna have honest conversations about it. What are some things that we can do differently? How can we reflect and adjust? Because at the end of the day, they're gonna have 30 middle schoolers staring at them expecting to get free and appropriate public education. And if they don't have the tools to do that, then they won't be able to. And so it's important that we center the experience of students, but outside of that, the experiences of teachers shape the experiences of students. And how do we prioritize their time to make sure that they have what they need on a day-to-day basis?
great, thank you. So I think what I'm hearing is what we have in our handbook for kind of planning and collaboration time is compromised for a variety of factors. And because we're not fully staffed in every building, it's hard to know exactly what you could add to it or adjust because we're not fully actualizing what we already have in the handbook. Did I hear that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, which would then take me to the next lever that a board member could potentially play, which is around class size policy. So I'm not sure, I didn't hear as much at the middle school level. If the kind of differentiation, the time to come up with the scaffolding, the strategies. Yeah, I don't know if that's impacted by class size as much as I heard at the elementary level or not.
Well, I would say, I'll look at you like that. Middle school is definitely different. We would pray 24 kids. Like 24, I'm like, man. But
And that's
the ask, that would be amazing because we don't get 24. Yeah, we're at the beginning of the school year, we were trying to get our class sizes down to under 30. That was our goal. We are pushing board maximum in a number of spaces, but the ask is also different in middle school. There are a lot of social emotional development needs that elementary students have that more of our students have figured out by the time they get to middle school. So it's a little different. But when we start digging into the assessment piece and looking into student writing and assessing, giving feedback on how they're doing, like 30 papers are still 30 papers. And it takes time to give effective feedback, especially for something that I'm writing is something that's creative in nature. And so there isn't a checkbox that you can say, okay, did this. You have to actually go through all of the assignments, conceptualize what are they trying to convey? Did they have the appropriate structure of the format of what they were trying to produce, and give them feedback on all those points. And so the long and short of it is, yes, class sizes matter. But at least some of the social emotional pieces, we don't necessarily need to dig as deeply as our elementary school staff need to.
I think along with that, there's an aspect of collaboration. And the collaboration comes back to that collaborative planning is not just one person's planning time. It's that collaborative planning time of people together. It's the same thing in the classroom. So Kelly's experience co-teaching is very different than another ELA teacher who does not have that opportunity to co-teach, co-serve in the classroom. And so looking class to class of how we're able to differentiate, how we're able to support, then goes back to what does that collaboration look like?
Okay. Thank you for such thoughtful responses. My last wondering, and if none of you have the answer, that's okay too. We've had a long running partnership in our school district with Schools of Hope, particularly at the elementary level for literacy. And I'm curious, given the newness that everybody's experiencing, and we've had actually Schools of Hope tutors also at Hill School, so I'm just wondering, is there a supportive role that our community partners who have brought in volunteer tutors, can they still play an important role? Or and if yes, if you could just highlight kind of how you've been able to utilize them, or how you plan to once you're feeling more, you know what I mean, on top of things. And if no one can answer tonight, that's okay.
I think this still continues to be an area of struggle and shortage of staffing for Schools of Hope, because I know that was even pre-COVID, that there were schools that didn't have Schools of Hope. It's been years, 8 years to be exact, that Orchard Ridge did not have one either. So like, I just know that there's schools that are on a list to stay there, and we just don't have people.
Okay.
If I may, I
Yeah.
would say that we have worked in very intentional ways to ensure that professional development is completely aligned to science of reading. So we continue to support in ways so that when we have staff that can come and volunteer, that they are coming and supporting in ways that are completely aligned with our ways of working.
Okay.
I would just add, the only other thing, and we started to have this conversation with you, is the research says the most high leverage tutoring is that happens during the school day while the kids are there. And so trying to think about the spaces, first of all, the training that Gabby talks about with the science of reading and the supports, and having the people, because we are across even tutoring short, but then where and what are they doing during that time, pushing in during the school day, because we're really trying to focus on not doing pull-out models where kids are getting pulled out and missing something else, or getting pulled out of before. And so that is, I think, the kind of place that we are right now in terms of figuring out how do we leverage these individuals based on, because most of them are not educators.
Yeah.
So how do we leverage these individuals with the right training, and what is the right work that they can do during the school day and where? And I think that's similar at middle school, because middle school's hope is after school right now. And so how are we thinking about something that could happen during the school day also? I don't think we've figured it out quite yet though, but it is conversations that we're having.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I was just, your comment, Miss Christie, about even if I had an EA in the classroom, a Schools of Hope tutor isn't necessarily an EA, but I was thinking about what if we had some additional adults who are focused on literacy support, and could that help? But it sounds like that's still a work in progress.
So I do. I have volunteers. I mean, I search them out. I do not let my friends who have days off have days off.
Okay.
And I beg them, but then I'm still planning for them, right?
Right.
I'm still getting things ready. I'm still getting materials ready.
Yeah.
We're super lucky paired with Toki. We do things where sometimes we get Toki students that come over to help. So I'm still planning.
Yeah.
For what the kids need.
Yeah, still a load on you. That's it for me. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for your questions, Board President Nichols. Board Member Mosser-Feldman.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and for teaching. I have questions and some thoughts. First is for the instructional coaching, do you get a chance or are you do you get to do anything besides literacy coaching or is it all literacy coaching?
Mark does many things.
I guess I know, I'm
Yeah.
sure many things besides, I mean, are you able to do any other types of coaching? Or is it all literacy coaching?
In the ideal world, yes.
Oh, no, in reality.
In reality, I would say majority of my actual coaching time is with literacy. And there are other district supports that have been able to step in to support. We have 2 new educators who are teaming together in our 7th grade math, so be able to support that because as the only instructional coach in our building, there's just not enough time to truly support all subject areas way that everyone deserves.
Thank you. Another question I have is about, and I know this is a report on the literacy piece of the 4 quadrants, but I'm curious about in your experiences in schools, how this priority rubs up against the other priorities in the SIP and how the work around this is different from how that's going or, yeah, just what's that like in your experience to be in a school that has multiple priorities and how this one fits in with the sort of school-wide vision for the year. And anybody who wants to talk about that, I'm curious. Or not, that's.
I have very strong future weight time still. I'm going to jump in. Literacy is foundational to our school plan, and so when it comes to thinking about how it fits in, the question is how do the other things fit in with literacy? And I can say that we really have 5 key priorities that we're working with as chairman this year, and even within those 5 priorities, 2 of them are explicitly literacy-based instructional moves. And so I would say it's not rubbing against. The question is that it's a very robust and diverse topic, and how can we align our other priorities and outcomes so that it supports literacy as well? Like, for instance, we're focusing this year on increasing the amount of students who have 90% attendance. Part of increasing student attendance, increasing student engagement, providing them with relevant, culturally relevant, but relevant in general curriculum and instruction. So it all goes hand in hand.
I would say equally at Toki. I mean, that this is a major strategy to support with literacy, math, attendance, and engagement, like all of that is. This is the work in order to reach the goals that we set. It's a separate entity.
And is that coming through in PD time?
Absolutely, every single day.
Okay, the other thing I'm curious about is like the assessments that come with it and how you. I think Marky talked about like, okay, now what do we want them to know? How do we know what learns and what's next? You talked a little bit about like structural shifts to like the what happens next after that assessment comes in. I'm just kind of curious about have you all gotten to the point in the year where you're like, okay, we've done a full assessment and like now are able to say, yes, our conversations around this are going great and they're supported by the curriculum, or is that a challenge?
So at the K2 level, we assess K1 weekly, K2 bi-weekly with our foundational skills. So we're constantly assessing. And that's another nice piece of this program is before it was, the assessment piece was a little more elusive. And now it's built into our program. So we are constantly cycling back through and changing our groups and changing what we're differentiating. With content, sort of like Mark said, we have a bigger picture goal in mind at the end, and so we can assess and change and differentiate along the way, knowing what that target is at the end. We have not had a formal, I guess we'll have our formal big assessment in January. Be more aligned with what you saw in the data on the screen later, but this program does have a lot of assessment built into it along the way.
And you feel really, it sounds like. Those are my questions. My thoughts, because could I go to a board meeting without offering random thoughts directed at nobody? Nope. Are around time. And it's like, it's not a secret that like American schools lack time. And our learning conditions for students and for adults alike are like a total, like on a factory speed up, and it's a churn, and it's not good for community health, and it's not good for learning. And so I think, you know, if we want to talk about what makes Madison a great place to work and a great place to learn, thinking about what are the changes that we can make schedule wise in days and in years to give learning the breathing room it really needs. So that's on my mind. And then the other thing that's on my mind is how we, you know, like President Nichols brought up, like, here's what the handbook language says about hours per day and what it's for. And I want to see us eventually being like, okay, well, if this is how many hours we have, and we've got these priorities, how many hours do we think these priorities take? And like, let's be realistic about what each school can do. And I think also mentioned like how do we differentiate school by school, right? If you're in an unpacking year, what does that mean about the additional or not additional, the other things that are on the plate, and having to be really thoughtful about like, it's not all one size fits all. If you have a brand new 7th grade math team and are unpacking boxes and you're in your 3rd year, which I know you said you're about in a mess for when that and then the last, no, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Mesmer-Felton or Vice President Pearson. Yeah, I just have a couple questions. I feel like most of the questions that I did have were pretty much are for the board and asked by my colleagues and by you all. So thank you all for being here. So I guess my question, and I think I kind of heard it a little bit with Orchard Ridge and Toki kind of working together here and there. But you know, is there spaces and times where the middle schools or even some of the elementary schools find time to or kind of say, hey, we're in the 3rd year, we're in the 2nd year, like what are some of the things that you guys are learning or that we could do better? Because I'm always thinking about how we can do things efficiently, but not like in the cog wheel kind of like machine kind of way, but just so that we can save time for you all to have more time to do other things and whatnot. So one is, are we kind of like working together across schools and teachers kind of having conversations, not just only within your school, but with other schools? And then like sharing what have we learned. So like if you guys are in the unboxing, like elementary might be able to give some context, like this is what has been working for us, or these things are not working for us. And so that you're not having to make the same kind of, you know, mistakes, and not necessarily mistakes, but so yeah. Open up the floor.
I would say as coaches, we had the opportunity to go to elementary, talk with coaches, talk with principals, talk with teachers. What was your experience your first year? What do we need to know coming into it? And what should we put on the back burner because we don't need that right away? And I don't think is as mutually beneficial for elementary school, but for us, that was massive. To be able to talk to other coaches, be able to talk with principals, and teachers about what to even expect. It changed the way that we went into the summer and into this year. It would not be where it's at without that. So from the middle school perspective, that was a huge strength to be able to check in with elementary schools who've gone through that process already.
I would have just, oh, go ahead.
And I could just raise like, I think from coaches being able to do from that's how we developed, right? And when I say like, I'm gonna get here to Patty for a minute, just to say like, that's how Patty and her team kind of had like the thought of having an implementation team, so selecting people around that. That's how we came to fruition around having PD for principals, how we had a PD for coaches, right? How we've started cross collaboration. So I think we've definitely learned from our elementary friends in that capacity.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's great to hear. And also I also think about, I know that in the past we've had, where we have the groups that are going through the curriculum, and then we selected and I guess just always having opportunities to evaluate, like, are things going well, truly going well? And then like, if they are, there's still areas of improvement. And so I'm always like thinking about those things. So thank you. The other question I had is just around movement to high school. So some of you all have spoke about, you know, if you guys are unpacking, the seventh graders have never done any of this, so trying to get them up to speed. And, you know, we have some schools with the elementary now that soon, in a couple years, will be in middle school and we'll have some of that knowledge. I guess just the perspective of moving into high school, like how do you all feel like with students starting now, even though you're just in the beginning phase? And do you feel confident that once you are able to get to maybe the third, fourth year, that the outcomes for students going into high school would be better? You don't have to answer that. It's a question. I
think that the rigor of the sixth grade curriculum, I don't know much about the sort of vertical alignment, I guess, like seventh and eighth grade in terms of y'all specifically. But my first year at Turkey in 2019, I worked with eighth grade, and I think about the skills that a lot of students just didn't really have going into eighth grade, of like being able to write an essay or multi-paragraph essay, or read, you know, grade level text and use text evidence and that sort of thing. The amount of emphasis that's placed on that in sixth grade, I feel confident that when these sixth graders are eighth graders, those skills will have only grown as the curriculum has continued to be implemented. And so by the time that they're in ninth grade, when they're presumably no longer using this curriculum, they'll know how to write an essay, they'll know how to write a summary, they'll know how to pick out evidence from a text and support an answer, they'll know how to make inferences. All of those things I think will be much stronger than I would have said that they were 4 years ago, if it continues to be implemented with, if not perfect fidelity because of those pieces we talked about, but like with integrity. I think that students will have more skills going into ninth grade than they might have 5 years ago. So that's worth.
Oh, it's worth it. Yeah, I know that we've heard essentially from high school teachers, you know, like they didn't want to do the EL and whatnot. I think knowing that now that you all are starting it, that there is some progression and that there is going to be some overflow and things will hopefully look bright as students go into high school. It feels really great, especially since my kids are in middle school right now. So I'm like, And then my last question is just around movement for students throughout the district. We know that we have a large population of our students who are transients. And I guess speaking to that experience, with some schools being in second or first years and some schools being in third years, are you experiencing any, I guess, catch up or just some kids getting a little behind, of what you've already been, teaching students through the university basis? Just how it's affecting students at the end.
I mean, I'll jump in while they're thinking about it. I think I brought this up in other, board session. Because we have about 25% of our student population that is mobile, having consistent curriculum across our schools is absolutely essential. Both on our side and on the side of the house. So from that perspective, just from a system perspective, I think it's absolutely essential. I know Orchard Ridge has a high mobile population and Sherman too. So I don't know if from the school perspective, you all respond. I do think that's why it's so important to have.
I would say that having an aligned curriculum across the middle school, especially because we're all in similar places of unpacking, has definitely made ELA instruction a lot easier for us to onboard students. We don't have to worry about a completely different instructional program somewhere else, and maybe a different pace, maybe a different order of how they're sequencing it. They're coming in around the same place, and onboarding has been a lot easier.
Yeah, we had a student come from Gillespie to Toki maybe early October, I wanna say. And she was super shy, like really nervous about coming to a new school, and she was like, oh, I've already read like part of this book at my old school. Like, I think we were maybe like 3 days or 3 lessons ahead of where they had been at Gillespie. And so she just, during extension time, just read the chapters that we had already read. And she felt comfortable and confident and like able to like come back to school and like feel that sort of like weight with her shoulders. And that was really good to see.
I know that was like one of our hopes.
Yeah,
when
yeah.
We were in the discussion about which curriculum to choose, and that was one of the biggest points that as a board we kind of rose is how does this affect students that are transient, especially because we have a large transient population of students. So that actually is really good to hear. And yeah, so thank you. I did have another question, but I know that Ali, I can give it back to you because I can just ask later.
You sure?
Yeah, because it's an administrative question. I want to thank my fellow board members for their questions and the educators who have joined us for the conversation. My question for the elementary school team, and you all spoke to this a little bit actually, kind of referencing like that some of what you're doing is musically informed. But I want to ask about kind of play-based learning. So when you think about literacy and you're talking about like a 5-year-old kiddo, how do you make that fun? How do you make that playful? How do you make that developmentally appropriate?
You talked about Joy when we talked last week.
Remember, Joy, it's 8 o'clock at night.
I know.
Or 7, but it's
Really.
midnight.
But it feels like it.
Daylight savings.
It's November.
Well, we're in the benchmark curriculum. However, I know our colleagues that are on the ELI side, one of their units is like creating a toy. So they've talked a lot about creating toys, and then the kids are excited to share with our students. Our focus in writing in kindergarten is drawing a detailed picture, and with having the like vocabulary knowledge base, the pictures that we've seen, especially this year in our second year of implementation, kids are getting a lot more into that like picture-y art type situation. And sometimes I think they forget they're even writing. They're like, oh, I gotta draw this manatee eating the seagrass. They get into this really creative moment. The songs are awesome. There's a lot of different movements that we're teaching. And the kids get really into it and they like to point out what we're doing. Oh, Miss Moreno did this, I already know this, and put them in kind of that expert position. I think as we implement the curriculum, because it's the second year and as we go into the third year, we kind of, as educators, see the opportunities to put play into it a little bit more. And as we have more time, see how we can kind of cross that over into our win time and our play time. So, yeah, I hope that answered your question a
That
little bit.
very much answered my question and was really exciting to hear. I'm gonna ask a similar question to the middle school team. Middle school, the text, I would imagine, includes poetry, plays, storytelling, graphic novels, comics. I appreciate hearing you say, Alex, that writing is creative in nature, like just speak right to my soul, okay? I could listen to you talk about Percy Jackson all day. I get why your students are into it. You got me feeling like I should be reading that.
Oh my, give me a copy.
I got extras.
And part of the reason I wanna emphasize play-based learning at the middle school level is if you're in 8th grade, that means that in 6th grade, 5th grade, and 4th grade, you did school online because of COVID. If you are in 7th grade, that means you spent part of 5th grade, 4th grade, and 3rd grade online. If you are in 6th grade, that means 4th grade, 3rd grade, and 2nd grade. So these are young people who had huge chunks of their foundational elementary school learning shifted dramatically to be happening online. And I greatly appreciate you two speaking to like, yo, this online thing for 5-year-olds is not actually that helpful. Because I think that reminds us all that these young people in middle school or these are older elementary kids, they were those 5-year-olds like struggling to attend school on Zoom. And so the fact that our middle school students are behind, I think is something we could have anticipated, right? This is our first full year not interrupted for COVID was last year. The 3 years before that, we saw these major interruptions in relationship to the pandemic. So can you talk a little bit about kind of the more expansive or play-based varieties of access to literacy at the middle school level? And can you also talk about the different types of texts that young people are exploring through this curriculum?
I think one of it, when we think about aspects of play-based in middle school, it's that collaboration piece and those opportunities to really talk with each other and the structures to support how to do that, both in a conversational way and an academic way is something. And when you talked about, you know, those elementary years of being online and interrupted, what that did to just the social aspect of students at that time and how that plays out now in their social interactions is something that we're still seeing at middle school. And so having conversations when we are turning and talking to peers, what does that look like? What does that sound like? What is integrity? What is collaborate? All those pieces is an integral part of the curriculum and how we implement what is put in the curriculum. I think that's a bigger thing. It can be written there, but what does that look like in our classrooms? So I think from that collaboration lens is one of the big pieces of just those interactions with each other and how we're supporting that student to student talk, not just staff to student or student to staff. And how to increase the time of kids talking to each other, collaborating together. And then the types of text, looking at the 4 different modules in each grade level, having informational text, 7th grade, when they move into module 2, they're talking about pandemics and diseases and things like that. Having narratives, poetry, 8th grade is module 3, I believe, it's reading Mouse and as a graphic novel, so it does bring in all different forms of types of text in it.
I really appreciate that you emphasize kind of the social nature of play-based learning at the middle school level. I have a middle schooler and yes, I think like the social components of school are what she lives for at this point. So I appreciate kind of the developmental appropriateness of that. It's great to hear that kids are getting the graphic novel Mouse for a many variety of reasons that I feel like we could get into in its own meeting. But thank you for really lifting kind of the types of texts young people are being exposed to. I had some curiosity about how using kind of Greek mythology and the archetypes lends itself to kind of greater understanding of text more generally. So if you're exposing kids to things like the sage, the doppelganger, the hero, and if you are saying, oh, you can also see those in your favorite comic book, you can also see those, you can identify them in different spaces. I have no doubt that you're doing that. I literally.
Today, today something so adorable happened, which was that we read for one of the texts about Percy Jackson, they had to read the myth Prometheus. It was for their mid-unit assessment. It was a very challenging text. I think the Lexile was like 1200 or something like that. It was really challenging. And today a student waved me over in math. Spansky, look, and he pointed at the smart board and it said it was a Promethean board.
Yeah.
Look, it's Prometheus. And I'm like, oh, look at you, you're making those connections. So it's like, yeah, a big focus of Percy Jackson is why are we talking about Greek mythology in 2023? Why it's still relevant today. And a lot of that has been that conversation of like the quest narrative, like how do quest narratives appear in the fiction that we read, the movies that we watch, the sort of allusions to Greek mythology, like a Promethean board, like stuff like that. Why do we still use these words in 2020 to talk about these things from, you know, thousands of years ago? So that's been really great.
That's really exciting for me to hear, as like a person who's an English like lover.
Yeah.
I'm really grateful that kids are connecting those dots, and I think that that's something that serves you throughout your academic education. I want to ask about teaching to the test. So we talked a little bit about assessment. I want to tease out what is assessment, what is grading. A kid can go, I think somebody said like 4 levels up or something, referring to a specific student, and still not be at grade level. Right? So a student can make tremendous progress because of where they're at, and that doesn't necessarily get us to that standardized testing space of proficiency. So where are we using this material to talk about kind of an individual student's growth? And where do these materials really get a student to grade level? And are we, how do our materials engage with kind of our standardized testing process? So do these materials strengthen our kids' ability to take a standardized test? I'm seeing nodding, but I'm not sure if that nodding is a yes.
Go ahead, Becky. I think that there's, we're looking this year because we actually are in our 3rd year at how our curriculum matches our standardized test. Because some of the, like thinking about things like sight words. If there's sight words that we're explicitly teaching at 1st grade, but they don't match the sight words that are being explicitly taught on the assessment, then there's a disconnect, right? And it doesn't mean that our kids aren't learning or growing, it just means they might not be learning or growing what's needed for that test. So how can we weave those pieces together and include that so that not that we're teaching to the test, but that when we're teaching about a high frequency word that we can include maybe some of the ones that they wouldn't otherwise see. But I think that what we're also seeing when I was saying that they were growing in micro phases, looking at a student who comes in well below grade level and is almost at grade level when they leave, that's a huge amount of growth. And when I can look at that child's parent and say, yep, here's what we did, and I can lay it out and I can show where they were at and where they moved to. Those parents don't care about that bar graph, not at the elementary level, right? I know it becomes more important at middle school, high school. But speaking as a parent who is having my 4th child now apply for college, most of those colleges are waiving those standardized tests. The ACTs are not being looked at as applying. The AP tests, maybe, but it's more about, did you take a lot of rigorous courses in high school, not how did you score? And I think that this curriculum absolutely does what's best for kids.
that we're giving them rigor, that we're empowering them, or that we're making them confident, that we're giving them the tools that they can take with them to the next level to tackle problems. You know, they feel confident and empowered, and watching kids walk out of the classroom with confidence, feeling like they can instead of they can't, that's what it needs to be about.
I think part of the reason I'm asking that question is because we're gonna look back 5 years from now and we're gonna want to have seen some shift in what our data looks like. And I think that this investment represents a commitment to doing better. And if it doesn't get us all the way there, then we need to figure out what gets us all the way there. And I'm not a person who subscribes to the idea of test scores. So I'm far more interested in kind of how students are being graded in their own progress and how we look at those things next to each other to have a more holistic picture of who our young people are as people. That being said, like, we all look at that data over and over again, and if it doesn't change, that's a really harsh reality check in terms of this work. The last thing I wanna say is if we can go back to slide 10. I think that this slide will come back to haunt us for a very long time in terms of who has access to dual language immersion and who does not in our district, and how that reinforces racial dynamics that we have seen throughout the history of that district. I think that's something that we need to monitor very carefully and have a plan to resolve, because in no way do I think it is fair or representative that 3% of our Black students are in dual language immersion. And so I just want to voice that I am not comfortable with this slide and what it represents and what it says about how opportunity is distributed throughout our district. I will say, I think the easiest way to resolve this slide is to have wall-to-wall dual language immersion. And I do understand that that is an intense like staffing issue. And so how we get to best practice, I think is something that we need to focus on multiple levels. My last comment is for our administration, and there's no response needed. It is that I think we need to be monitoring this investment in literacy long-term, and we need to have a clear understanding of the kinds of results we should expect. I can't thank the educators who joined us tonight enough for sharing what it looks like inside the classroom. Before we move on, our superintendent, Lisa, do you have anything you want to add to this conversation?
I just want to say thank you to all of you again for the work that you're doing. And I want to say something that maybe we talked about but didn't explicitly acknowledge is I think in order to support the high quality teaching that you're talking about in classrooms, the instructional leadership that a principal provides, the district has for years and years invested in instructional coaches in our schools. And I'm hearing tonight some really healthy, collaborative ways that coaching is happening in schools. And I would be remiss to not bring that up. I just appreciate that perspective tonight, and the commitment that the board has made to continue to invest in that in our schools, because this is exactly like, this is the real stuff that happens. This is the real coaching, the real interacting, the real reflecting. And I just want to honor that tonight and say, thank you for bringing a team and talking about that in your schools, because I think it's really important as we continue to go and move forth and learn together about the best ways that we teach children how to read and learn in classrooms. So.
All right. Yes.
I just have to say, this conversation is also so timely because, as you know, we're in the midst of a search for a new superintendent. And so just hearing what it's taking for you all to even like launch and get things off the ground, and then thinking about how we need to stay with it long enough to get good at it is, I think, a really important hat for us to be wearing too, as we're thinking about who we're vetting and who we will eventually hire.
Yeah, I can agree with you more. Thank you for bringing that to the table, Board President Nichols. I want to let you all go home.
Yes.
It's a long day. Thank you all so much. We have one other topic that we're gonna dive into. Board members, before we dive into the next topic, feels like, is there something else you all need from us? No. Board members, before we dive into the next topic, do folks need a recess or do we want to go straight into advanced learning? I think we can do recess or to allow everyone to leave the room too. All right, we're gonna take 5 minutes. We'll come back at 7:15. Thanks, y'all. That break was longer than I meant for it to be.
Right, or like, girl.
What do you?
Yeah, degree.
All right, we are back to this meeting. I want to thank folks for the time and patience to have these really important conversations. Our next conversation is related to advanced learning.
Is
So-
it advanced?
I'm sorry, that's my bad.
Jesse, could you do me a favor and pull up the memo? We're not gonna go through the memo in great detail, but I'll kick us off and then I'll introduce. So, tonight's, minor is about early college and advanced. So a little different than, advanced learning. Our team tonight is, Mary Jankovic again, our executive director of secondary. Shaver, our director of CNI at the secondary level, and is our director of pathways and CT. I want to recognize that this memo as a minor is long and there is a lot of detail in this memo. We will not spend too much time going through all of the details. We'll spend some time highlighting some of the successes over the last few years, as well as areas of improvement. And if the board so chooses, after we go through this topic, to have this as a major sometime throughout the year, we welcome that as well. I also want to just name that sorry. I want to name that the work that we have been thinking about as it relates to early college and has really evolved, even just in the last 5 years, based on what we have learned about the future for our students post high school as they enter into that world of college, career, community, and also what the landscape for our students is post COVID. We've seen a change in what our students are interested in after high school post COVID that is different than what things looked like 5 years ago. So if you, Mitch is going to talk us through pieces of the memo. You'll see that we're constantly evolving and changing based on where our students are and what the post high school life looks like. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mitch, and he's just going to talk us through pieces of the memo.
Thank you very much for that introduction. As you mentioned, this is a 5-page memo that could have very easily been a 50-page memo if I was properly caffeinated and given some time to write it. So I do believe that there is a great opportunity to kind of further this conversation, whether it be through future questions that you all have for us or another conversation, another convening. There is some information that I had a discussion with the City of Madison, with the Department of Workforce Development, as well as some researchers from UW that kind of, I think, best articulated some of the opportunities and challenges that we face as we think about students transitioning from high school into post-secondary life. One of them is just the economic reality that most the future will require some form of post-secondary credentialing. I think we've heard a lot of those stats in the past. The percentage of jobs that pay a livable wage now require certification, some level of college attainment, et cetera. But we're also faced with the reality that the decision-making process of a lot of high school students is changing. Since COVID, 1.4 million fewer students are enrolled in college. And we also know that there is a significant portion of our young adult population that is disconnected both from a institution of learning or work. So I believe 15% nationwide, 16 to 24-year-olds are not enrolled in school or work. And so when we think about what it means to be successful when you are leaving high school, I think our definition is evolving to include some additional components. Obviously the kind of first benchmark is high school graduation. And we also have the goal that all of our graduates are leaving college, career, and community ready. But I think there's a third component that we have an opportunity to address, which is accelerating students towards those credentials that have been identified as valuable to the student's future work or school. And so with the help of the Research Assessment and Innovate and Improvement Office, we have been looking at a new metric of what proportion of our graduate class have left with either college credit already in hand, so tuition savings, or a credential that has been defined as high valuable by the state of Wisconsin's Department of Workforce Development. And so what this memo represents is sort of an analysis of where those credentials are coming from, how many students have had access to those, and what opportunities exist in kind of going forward. So on the second page, there's a big table that highlights just looking at our college credit attainment over the last 5 cohorts of graduates. In the class of 2019, about half of all graduates were leaving with some college credit in hand. They were earning that through a combination of advanced placement test scores or dual transcripted credit, dual enrollment course taking. There has been a significant increase in that college credit attainment rate. We're sitting a little bit above 60% today. And there have been growths amongst every demographic or every demographic population in our district, but those gains have been unequal, or they are still not all at whatever equity gaps still continue to exist. That will require some addressing. But I do want to highlight some of the good work in increasing the amount of college credit attainment that has been happening. You know, as we look at AP scores or AP attainment over the last several years, what we actually find is that the students that are not earning AP credit are typically not earning AP credit because they are not sitting for the exam. So it's not that students are sitting for the test and not passing it, it's that there is a opportunity gap in students taking the course and then not taking the exam, not taking the thing that would confer the college credit. So I know the Advanced Learning Office is working on marketing additional communication with students, with counselors, with families about the opportunities that exist. I know there was a large communication campaign happening this fall to encourage students to sign up for the exam happening this spring. And some additional good news, I believe last year there were 3,600 AP exams that students took, and already we have 4,500 students registered for the spring. So increasing access to that is one of the major pushes in our secondary office. Furthermore, the list of AP courses that we are offering continues to be evaluated and looked to be expanded upon. We want to ensure that all students have access to content that they're interested in, that they think would be applicable to their post-secondary life. And so we will continue to seek opportunities to expand it. Similarly with college credit, dual credit happening in the high schools or dual enrollment happening on Madison College or UW's campus, we're continuously seeking to expand the opportunities that exist on those campuses. 5 years ago, the graduating class of 2019, only 22% were leaving with college credit from dual credit or dual enrollment. That number has nearly doubled to 42% of our graduates now. And of that population that takes a dual credit or dual enrollment class, the graduating class of 2019, they were on average leaving with 3 college credits, so like 1 course. Today, the college credit enrolling students are leaving with 12 credits.
So I agree.
That's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. It's wonderful expansion, and we're going to continue to expand as much as possible. But there is still a lot of work to do. You know, there's still half the population of the class of 2023 that was not engaged in one of the courses. So some significant engagement is still necessary there, as well as the quality and value of those 12 credits is not equally distributed. So if students aren't exactly sure what they're going to be majoring in, those 12 credits may or may not transfer to their exact program of study. And so partnering with our academic and career planning coaches, college career readiness coaches, counseling, kind of integrating our counseling services with the opportunities that exist and dual credit, dual enrollment will be critical to ensure that not only are they earning college credit, but it's of the highest value for their post-secondary credits. I can probably go another 40 minutes on that, but we'll move on to career technical education. So dual credit AP is saving tuition costs when a student is attending a college. But there is another valuable post-secondary credential that can be earned, which is, you know, through DWD and kind of identifying industry credentials that prove a level of proficiency in a desired field. In career and technical education, there's a list of about 40 different credentials that are available. And we are seeing strong growth in the number of students that are taking multiple courses within a career and technical education program of study. Our number of CTE concentrators is what they're called, has gone from about 400 pre-pandemic to about 750 graduates last year. And we're continuing to expand at the middle school level as well as at the high school level. We are opened up 3 new programs at middle schools, 3 more at the high school level this year. But it's not all good news. The programs of study in the department are not yet conferring a significant increase in the number of credentials. One of the reasons for this is the program of study has a lot of like fits and stops and starts, because the breadth of courses that we have offered is so vast, and the fluctuations of course requests year over year has led to these situations where a program of study will have kind of a gap of time where maybe the middle course isn't offered. And so then there's this like lag time where a student can re-enroll in the program. And so a lot of the work that we're focusing on now is tightening up the programs of study so that the opportunity isn't lost at the advanced level. We've done a really good job of providing access at the orientation level of a CTE program, but we haven't fully committed to ensuring that the advanced courses are running year over year to ensure that the credentials are. And then the final piece that I will highlight is just an opportunity that I think is highly under leveraged in our district, which is the youth apprenticeship program. We have a large number of willing partners from our business community that are interested in hosting youth apprentices, which would be 450 hours of paid employment experience that we pair with a college credit-bearing course of related coursework. So a student taking a pharmacy tech course at Madison College paired with a pharmacy internship or apprenticeship. We have a plethora of opportunities within our business community for students to engage in this YA program. Pre-pandemic, there were only 15 participants completing YA opportunities. This year, we're going to have about 50. And while that's great, I think that number should be several hundred. When we look at the number of juniors and seniors that have time in their schedules, that have identified a post-secondary plan, and have shown an interest in a specific content area, we think that the youth apprenticeship opportunity would be a great way to capstone some of the CTE sequences, would be a great opportunity to fill some of the gaps that exist where maybe there isn't a program of study because an interest is too niche to offer like at a school level. We think we are currently under leveraging the apprenticeship program. And so the continued expansion of that is going to be reliant on us in MMSD, but also our business partners, the City of Madison, the Department of Workforce Development, the Chamber, are all going to be partners in working out a way to continue the expansion that we've seen over the last couple of years. I know that this was like, let me cover 4 different kind of diverse programs and the opportunities that exist in them in a short amount of time. But I believe that our goal should be that all graduates are leaving not only graduates of our district, not only with college career readiness, but also with credentials that are tangible and providing them tangible economic value that accelerate them towards these high wage, high skill and in demand careers. And I know that we can't do that alone, and there's going to be a lot of partnership that will continue to reach that goal.
So thank you so much. Before we close it out, I want to restate what Mitch said in terms of thinking about something tangible in hand for our graduates outside of just a diploma is absolutely essential. And we are only doing that for just under 60% of our students, yet the path forward and what we know in terms of how landscape has changed, how we have evolved over time. We have learned when you know better, you do better. And we've learned that we need to shift how we are providing course offerings for our students and just the way our students are getting access to these opportunities. So I just want to outline a few things before I turn it back over to Board Chair. In order to do that, as you can see, kind of our road ahead has some implications that we need to consider. I think those implications are both just internally in terms of budgetary implications. If you remember earlier this year, Cardona was here. The work that Cardona is talking about at the federal level also has dollars that are directly tied to this work. So both how are we thinking about our partners, how are we thinking about the dollars outside of the district and the dollars within the district in terms of making this a reality for all of our students. And then we just decided it was important to highlight some of the most pertinent policies that have implications for students. So at the end of the memo, we've talked many times about what we need to think about for our graduation requirements. We've talked about our policies related to early college credit program and our policy to start college now. And then we also have a policy that we think has some implications that relates to career and technical education and those CTSOs, which are those co-curriculars that students access. The last thing I'll just name is when we think about where we wanna kind of put some parameters around requirements. Mitch mentioned at the beginning, our students have the option to sign up for the AP exam. And if a student is identified as free and reduced lunch, we pay for it. Otherwise, it is a cost on the student and the family. When we think about shifts and changes we want to make, that's an example of where a policy, our practice, and our budget may come into play. So with that, as I said in the beginning, it's a dense memo. We know that there's a lot in here. And so if there is the desire, we will come back again. But I will turn it back to Board Member Muldrow to engage in conversation.
Thank you so much for this update. I know this is supposed to be kind of our smaller portion of the evening, but it's a really important area. And I sense some sincere enthusiasm from my fellow board members and from you. Thank you for, your restraint in making this 5 versus 40 pages. Board Member Mosner-Feltman and then Board Member Vandermeulen.
Thanks. Super exciting work to see it laid out. I'm curious, I'm gonna talk about it twice tonight, like flexible scheduling at the high school level. Is that something you're thinking about? What are the considerations that we would wanna be thinking in that? What's on your mind with that stuff?
Yeah, I think anything, when I think about the senior year, I would encourage us to think about what kind of flexibility could exist to encourage students to engage in the variety of like non-traditional advanced learning opportunities that exist. So scheduling in a way that would make it easier to align with college coursework, would make it easier to align with the requirements of a youth apprenticeship program where you need to be on a job site, as well as also exploring like what is possible from an independent study route where students might have some specific interests and research opportunities that they could explore and do that with fidelity where they can be engaged with the community rather than in a classroom. I think that opportunity to have students kind of explore one of those routes during senior year is a wonderful opportunity, and to the extent that the schedule would be flexible enough to allow that would be terrific.
Thanks.
Anything else from you?
Not yet, not right now.
Okay. Board Member Vandermeulen.
Yes, I'd like to talk about the one group that isn't listed in here, and that's students with disabilities. I'd like to see what our relationship is with big colleges, both at UW-Whitewater and Edgewood, both of which have both think colleges and disability colleges. Also like to, I'm preaching to the choir on the chart, but it's kind of gets hard when you never see yourself on it. And with disabilities, we never see ourselves on it. And it's kind of hard to see sometimes because we're here in college, career, and community ready. And there's 14% of our school population with disabilities and we don't see it. So I'd like that. I'd also like to explore, and this could be in a memo, about individuals with disabilities graduating with an actual diploma, not just a certificate of completion. I think that will help in college and career. It can't be done in all cases, but it can be done in quite a few of them. And currently our policy is to do a certificate of completion, and you have to actually argue to sometimes get that, and that can be really frustrating. But most importantly, what I want to see is classes that can be made accessible and classes between the university and MMSD that can provide a bridge. Just like we did with STEM Academy, I think we could actually have something there. And oftentimes AP classes also don't always have as many disabled students. And I think we need to include that. No, college is not the goal for every individual, but working in the community very well may be. And it shows that individuals with disabilities who have at least 2 paid internship work experiences at high school are 80% less likely to serve in a shelter workshop and actually be in competitive employment. And I consider that essential. I really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for all of your feedback. I'll just name that. Thank you for pointing out that our data is missing groups, and we will make sure that we get that updated. And that's a apology, not just to you, Nikki, but to the community. So we'll make sure it's updated and included. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Board Member Vandermillen, for your questions. I saw Board Vice President Pearson and then Board President Nichols.
Yeah, so one thing that we heard from students, and I guess this is just how do we support the work that is going on with this. We heard from students on Friday from Wes. One student asked specifically the question of counselors. And what are we gonna do about counselors versus the students that they have? And so I'm constantly thinking about, okay, so if we don't have enough counselors for the student body, how are we being creative in getting the information to students? Working with actual high schoolers. A lot of them didn't know about the AP testing, some did. Some knew because their counselor told them, and others didn't know until some of the students in the program that signed up for AP told them, and then they signed up for AP testing. And so how are we trying to ensure that the students, I know Mitch said it, that there are some ways to do that, but I guess I'm curious of what those are.
So I would say, first of all, one of the areas that we have constantly talked about is we have to do a better job of ensuring that students and families know about the opportunities before they walk through the doors of high school, which is why we're really trying to push down into our middle schools. Back to Board Member Mosner Felton's question around scheduling. Sometimes if we wait until senior year to create that flexible schedule, it's almost too late. So how are we thinking about that from the moment that kids walk through the door and in middle school? So communication across the board and different ways of communicating is an area of improvement for us. We've started to think about different ways to have the teachers share in the classroom throughout the AP exams. We've pushed out through school messenger, out to counselors. But that's still, I do not think is enough. So it is definitely one of the areas we're continuously thinking about, working with Madison College and other partners on, and welcome other ideas. So I would just say it's a growth area for us. In terms of counselors, right now at the high school level, our counselor ratio is usually a 250-1 or a 300-1, which is the national model, but it also means you've got 250 students on the caseload. At middle school, we've done the board actually invested, we've decreased that allocation. We also have college and career coordinators in the high school, or formerly ACP coordinators. So thinking about how they work together. And then the last thing I'd say is one of the things we were in hope that happens through the referendum is that everyone has a college and career center, so that there's this central hub where students know where to go to get people are in there as well, where the community partners can be as well. And so as the referendum this 2020 referendum closes out with some of the construction at the high school, we also hope that those college and career centers can be fully realized, and it can be a place where jobs are found, information is found.
And I can speak as far as like opportunity, like when we have informational nights that parents and families and join like virtually, we know we've had great and success in that. I think broadening that as well, to make sure that we're hitting up board for just segmented programs, kind of get that opportunity too, so.
Thank you for that. And thank you for explaining that too. I mean, it kind of goes into my other question of just about the conversations that we're having at the middle school level. And I'm glad that you mentioned like that the community partners that are offering the internships are paid internships. Because that is super important, especially with a lot of our children also helping with bills in the family and whatnot. But I think knowing that those opportunities exist in the middle school kind of sets kids and families to know that that is a possibility, and that is just not like a program that the kid can participate in, but it's actually a career path, and that it's something larger where it is having high income return, and so the return on investment is definitely there. And seeing the value of that, and trying, so not just only saying, okay, we're gonna increase the access by telling folks about this, but really like, what are the impacts that these career choices can have? And I know that some folks when I was going to college, and it's like, oh, you can go into all these different things, and it's like, well, am I gonna make money in these things, or am I not? And I think that that's a real question to answer. And so, yeah, I'm just curious about the conversations that we're having with middle schoolers and their families, and how we're kind of approaching that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a 6-12 experiential learning continuum where in the middle schools, there are, career fairs, career work type of events where we're trying to expose students to different opportunities that they have. And that's all paired with the college and career readiness activities through Zello. But you mentioned parents and families, and we've seen that that's been kind of the greatest, the most effective mover of sort of like misconceptions and things about different industries. And so last year we did a trades night on the east west side, targeting specifically bringing parents in to meet with different unions and different tradespeople to show that this isn't maybe what your perception of this career is. This is how much money you might make. This is what the job is entailed. And so the more that we can be embedding those within our middle schools so that they can inform students as they're selecting courses into high school, will go a long way.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, because I also think that creates a pathway even for families, like parents and other kind of adults in the family say, hey, this might be an opportunity that I can move into as well. And so thank you for naming that, because that's also something that is very real. I guess my last question is just around how we're utilizing community partners, not in offering internships, but also helping us get families and students to know that these opportunities also exist. And so I'm thinking of, there are some organizations or just smaller groups of folks who volunteer in our schools. Like, do they know these exist? Are they also talking about it? So I guess how we're leveraging our community partners in this in that way.
Yeah. I hope we are. We are doing our best to try to make sure that from the counselors, ACPs, as well as the embedded partners, are informed and aware of the opportunities that exist. But I know there is work still to be done. We have found success with our apprenticeships are working directly with a lot of employers, but our internships are run through a variety of community-based organizations. There's 12 different community-based organizations that we've partnered with that have helped working in different neighborhoods, different groups of our community, and they are not only helping us connect families and students to these opportunities, but are also rounding out the education with like supplemental personal financial training, with other sorts of engagements that are supplemental to the internship experience. One thing I'll highlight is that the partnership with the Boys and Girls Club and the Mackenzie Regional Regional Workforce Center. So they have a group of families and students that they've been working with for years. We've now partnered with our middle school CTE programs to do site visits to that center to leverage the resources and the different types of offerings that they have that we're not offering in CTE. And they are bringing MMSD students that have been disconnected from CTE into our programs for summer camps and things like that that are, so a symbiotic relationship where we can reach a new group of students and families to share what opportunities exist. So the more we can expand that sort of model, that's our goal, is to continue expanding that.
Okay, thank you. That's it for my questions.
Thank you. I think your questions provoked board member Mosby. So provocative. I'm sorry. I have you after Mark. Okay, so then.
Is it a quick, I mean, not a quick, is it a follow-up to what Maya just brought up?
But you should go.
Go for it. Go.
Okay, I'm curious to what extent there are opportunities for this, to take advantage of the many different types of careers within MMSD. I'm thinking about like how brokenhearted like these students were about their outdoor ed stuff, and like this is an opportunity to say, oh, hey, like I'm the person who runs the tree management for the district, and like this is a job that you could have like through the whole system. Something you've thought about, or if there's room for it.
Talk about the workforce development.
What's that?
Workforce development.
Oh, spelling, absolutely. Well, so there's a couple things. So yes, that is an area that we have explored and we currently have several engagements, but it is, I think, still under leveraged. The IT department, last year we kicked off a sort of like help desk. Yeah, absolutely. So at our high schools that have CTE IT programs, we have students that are working from the help desk when tickets are requested, or working with the embedded IT professionals to use the experiences that they're learning in the high school. But what Cindy was alluding to was building services has done a wonderful job of thinking creatively about how students could be exposed to the world of building services. So I work closely with them through referendum. CTER labs are being remodeled in certain places, and building services has welcomed our students in from our trades programs to be part of meetings, discussing the modifications to blueprints, discussing how they are attacking certain projects, project management. Students at our high schools have been throwing on hard hats and going on to job sites. And these have primarily been single day or a couple of day experiences. But they have, building services has already put the call out that they're seeking longer term internships and apprentices from that population. So it's beginning to bloom.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, board president Nicole.
You're good. Well, first of all, thank you for the memo and the update. I really appreciate hearing it, and I'm really excited about thinking about the ways that, as you were saying, we can put something like tangible in the hands of our graduates. So a couple things that I think I'm curious about. One is as we're talking about early college and advanced coursework, I'm making an assumption that we're talking primarily about students who are in our comprehensive high schools, and maybe not our students in our alternative ed. And I am curious around, particularly when we start to look at CTE, what opportunities are the students who are in Capitol High, Shabazz, some of the other programs, how and are they being also introduced to these opportunities as a way to walk out of high school with something tangible?
Absolutely.
So can I just start with the referendum piece and then I'll turn to you. So the answer is yes, they are, especially when it comes to the early college opportunities through Madison College and all the academies. And then Mitch can expand. And a reminder that Capitol High was built specifically around this concept, with having a STEM lab, a culinary space, a health science space, so that they could actually engage in a learning and be kind of small multiple pathways school in order to do that. And so they're in the first phase of that, but I'll let Mitch expand on that. So the answer is yes.
So I hear you, and that's not the same as earning a credential. right?
It leads to, so he could talk.
Yeah, so Capital has 3 CTE programs, 2 of which are in their first year right now. So
Okay.
credentials won't be, it has to phase, it's phasing in. So yeah, the culinary arts program will confer.
I saw all the kitchen hoods on the walkthrough.
Absolutely, yeah. ProStar, variety of college credit through the culinary arts program. The health science lab will have a credential through Madison College as well. And then they have the early child education program running as well. And so that's Capital High School. Now for Shabazz, as well as any other OIR participating student, and even students in the virtual academy, we have reserved seats for like the CNA program at one of the comprehensives. So we have students traveling, coming from Shabazz to West or to Memorial to take courses within the CNA lab there.
Okay.
We have students that will go on to Madison College to take courses over the summer or during their academic school year. You know, in one of the Madison College labs, phlebotomy, you know, again, like the nursing assistant.
Okay.
We have a variety of students taking some automotive courses. We started this year, in the spring, we're gonna have our first cohort of a diesel tech program, so working on heavy machinery, and Madison College has built us an MMSD specific cohort, like a section, just for our students that's on our calendar. Our calendar.
Okay.
And so I know we have a number of students from that are in OIR schools that are gonna be attending that as well.
Okay, that's awesome. I just wanted to make sure I was clear about who has access. So I appreciate hearing that. The second thing that I'm wondering about, particularly as we're talking more about the role of CTE and growing apprenticeships, is, I guess the question for me is, where does all of that fit with Pathways? And I know we're not necessarily here to talk tonight about Pathways, but initially Pathways was also kind of career focused and industry focused, building in, you know what I mean, like some of that early exposure and helping our graduates walk out with a better idea of the array of careers in a particular cluster. This is, I know, a little different, but do we see it as something that continues as we're expanding the early college and advanced coursework opportunities, or that should come at a later time in the conversation?
Yeah, so I view them as like concentric circles, where the students that are viewing their post-secondary pathway as I'm going to be a professional culinary artist, I'm going to be an auto mechanic, I'm going to be a phlebotomist. The CTE sequence that ends in the credential is what they should be engaging with.
Okay.
Whereas the value of the personalized pathway work is connecting not only that content-rich program, but also the academic subjects, your math or English or history. Like, why are those important relative to the, everyone's engaging with the health field, especially in the last couple of years. Everyone is in one way or another gonna be engaging with technology and, personal privacy and just AI and information, all that stuff. And so I view the pathway experience as seeing how the content that they're learning in all of their courses is related to the community, their real life, and these kind of like opportunities that exist in the labor market. And then kind of embedded within the high school experience are these opportunities to accelerate towards being a professional in that field right now, which is the goal of the advanced career technical education programs.
Okay, because I think what would be an interesting addition to this, although it's not quite under the umbrella of early college and advanced coursework, it would be more under the umbrella of preparing students for life after high school, right? If we had the numbers of students listed in your memo, including also the students who are currently in Pathways, as kind of getting how many students are we actually helping?
Absolutely.
Is that in the memo?
So great news. The kind of it's not
I missed
in the
it.
memo. But the first draft of this, we made sorry, I shouldn't say made, we requested that Research Assessment and Improvement Office give us all that data as well.
Well, look
And
at
so we
that.
have it all. We decided to focus this memo just on like the tangible credentials that we all have. And so I can, if, yeah.
No, I think that
at
would
the
be
time
a
we
great
put that back in.
view for all of us to be able to talk about like what it means to be a high school student, a middle school student a secondary student in our district, and what graduating from MMSD can lead to. And how we're providing as many rich opportunities for young people to kind of figure out what they're good at, what they're interested in, and what's possible in the real world in terms of either post-secondary opportunity, a real credential, like working and making like good money, you know, right after school. So I think that would be great.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks. There's nothing else related to the specific numbers and program areas that you identified. I do want to just touch base for a little bit on the policy implications if we can. Okay, so I don't know am I directing this to you? Okay, so starting with the graduation requirements, you write in here that changes to an advanced coursework strategy may be best implemented if done in tandem with a revision to district graduation requirements. And I guess my wondering is, our district graduation requirements come from the state, right? Or do we add to those, or?
We add to those.
Okay,
There's minimum requirements per DEI, and then in addition to that, we as a district add on what we also believe is essential for a diploma. So it's
Okay.
both and.
so in this case, are you thinking that if we wanted to include advanced coursework, it's not currently listed as one of the ways in which you can earn your diploma?
Yeah, let me explain kind of
Okay.
what that means a little. One of the things we have been talking about, and it requires this conversation and more, is that do we believe that students should graduate with something else in hand besides something tangible? So 3 college credits or an industry credential, or 6 college credits or 6 college credits. And like this idea of, do we want to ensure both from a cost savings perspective for families, as well as truly launching them into something post-secondary? Is there something that a lot of districts across the nation do now? Is that something we would want to consider? And if so, would we want to fold that into our graduation policy? There are some other things we would want to think about in terms of other adjustments that we have for our graduation policy, but that's an example of what that means.
Okay. Okay, thank you for spelling that one out. Then for the next policy, you listed policy 4029, early college credit program. You're
So-
saying an evaluation of the language and implementation of the policy is recommended to ensure equitable access to college coursework. And that this should be aligned with policy 4030, which is the Start College Now program, will encourage equitable participation and eliminate ambiguity. Say more, please.
I will start and I can turn it over. So first of all, both of these policies are direct language from state legislation. So we literally copy and pasted state legislation language and put them into policy. It used to be YOP and youth options and youth, I can't think of the anyways. And when the state made changes, 2 things are important. One, the state had these as separate legislations because they forgot the technical college in their first round policy. So the only one of these that actually has any reimbursement to districts is the ones that are connected to the 4-year, which is the early college credit program.
Oh,
So I just
wow.
want to name that, right? Everything else comes out of our pockets and we are partially reimbursed for early college credit program. I think what we are saying is, should we look at this policy to be more explicit about what we are actually trying to accomplish for our students, align to what we are saying if we change the graduation. Of how do we actually make that happen so that students are able to take advantage of these two policies that are statewide, but for us would be essential for that other percentage of students that we named that have yet to earn something upon graduation. Mitch, would you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, both policies have language that limit the types of courses that students can take,
What
so.
Oh, sorry.
Well, and the number, so there is we have language that states that students can take up to 18 college credits in high school that we will pay for. And so like, is that a limitation that we want to continue to have, or do we just say you can take as many as you want? That's one way to kind of modify the policy. Both the state policy and ours says that the course can't be equivalent to something that we offer within the district. So like if we offer AP Bio, so like Bio 101 at UW is not something that is approvable, but I've been talking to DPI and it's sort of vague as to like what access means in that case. Like just because the course is at your school doesn't mean that there was a seat for you. Right, like if the, so like, are we able to kind of open it up and say like, okay, you're offering this many sections at the high school, anything that is beyond that, should we still grant access at W? And how do you kind of like monitor that? Because I don't know, there's like allocation implications and course selection implications as well. So I think it's vague right now, and I think it's worthwhile for us to kind of come together and say like, what do we actually mean by like equivalent and access to these types of courses?
Okay.
And that gets very much in the weeds.
Okay, and then the last one, policy 4402, career and technical education student selection. So you want to say more about
Yeah,
this
I
one?
can start and then I'll turn this one over to Mitch also. So first of all, one of the things that career and technical education offers is co-curriculars, which are called CTSOs. One of the things that we
I'm sorry, the acronyms, you know,
Yeah, I know.
okay, yes.
The student organization for the CTE programs. Currently, we see varied students taking advantage of that. One is there are fees related to that. And fees can be costly for students. HOSA, for example, which is our that under the health services is not cheap. And so that is one area that we have talked about before. And if you remember, we were here last year, we talked about student fees related to co-curriculars. So that is an area. What else do you want to say about that?
No, I think that's the right area. There are or I mean, some of the classes have had course fees. It would get waived for a lot of students, but yeah, this, not all, but like the CTSO participation has been kind of previously a major barrier, because the student has to participate in a variety of not only join the organization, but then also if they make nationals, there's travel involved, there's other sorts of costs associated with it. We've been using some funds that we get for CTE students, like earning certifications. We get a reimbursement from the state from a CTE incentive grant, and we've been using those to supplement participation to reduce the cost as much as possible. But that hasn't been policy. It's just been sort of a thing that we've been doing. And so I'd like to find a way to kind of like declare what support is eligible for student participation of these opportunities, because there's also like scholarships attached to them and other kind of opportunities that build off of participation.
Okay, great. And just so I understand, is 4402 independent of the graduation and the kind of early college bundle, I'll call it, that would kind of go in tandem? Okay. And is the graduation requirement policy that we have plans to look at that this year, correct? Okay, awesome. All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Board Member Simpkin.
Thank you. So I find all of this very exciting, and I really appreciate that we have all these different that students or different tracks that students can try out, different potential careers and opportunities to receive college credit. I'm also thinking about where students' brain development is at these times in their life. So they're still figuring out who they are, they're still figuring all the different pieces of what they may want to be when they're, you know, even a young adult. And so I'm curious. First, I want to say, I think that just having these experiences is valuable in and of themselves. And are we tracking in any of these programs outcomes? So who is using a technical diploma or a certificate in employment in 3 years and 5 years down the road?
Sort of. So part of our Perkins Granted Funds Career Technical Education requires that we do an alumni follow-up each year. So of the several hundred students that are CTE concentrators, we try to reach both by phone and by email those students to verbally ask them like what they're doing next. Some of that information we get from, if they're enrolled in college, we get it from the clearinghouse, but if they're not, we ask. As a kind of data person, I recognize that that is not the most reliable information. Students, when you're like, we're calling on behalf of CTE, are you using CTE? We'll say yes. But that's the best that we have because there is not currently a mechanism in the state of Wisconsin to track like employment and tie it back to educational records.
Can I add just a little to that? I'll just use the Early College STEM Academy very similarly. Students are graduating with an Associate of Science. We had our first group of students that graduated college, those went on to secondary. And the only way we are able to kind of track that is through emails, calls, follow-ups. Sometimes they're sending it back to us, like by chance. One of the conversations we've had with the city and Workforce Development Board is around this data sharing because it is a huge gap in the state of Wisconsin. As Mitch said, outside of National Clearinghouse, which we can easily get, but outside of that, it is really tough to track that unless we're, you know, calling and someone's willing to give us that information. That data does not exist.
Are you pulling together those calls anywhere? Like, could we even, can we see, you know, like, what is that level of, I'm not even sure what word to use, it's not really follow through, but how many students are using those opportunities as a launching point for a career?
Yes, that data does exist. It could be cleaned and provided in some kind of data. Yep.
I'd be really curious, and I recognize it's really difficult to figure out how to systematically obtain that. And it's again, clean data.
Yeah.
But with all of these efforts, it would be really nice to know what's sticking and what are opportunities that may be launching students in different directions.
Board members again, is that it for you?
That's it.
All right, Jesse, I wanna ask that you bring up page 2 of the memo. And I did, board member Vandermeulen had to hop off, but I did send this chart to her specifically. So what I really like about this chart is that you do see students with IEPs on this chart. You see a breakdown via gender, and the data seems to trend in a really positive direction, and it's easy to get excited about that. However, because you see every student group kind of doing better, it means that the young people who were the furthest behind continue to be the furthest behind. So even though Black students saw an increase of 19%, and that's the greatest increase, they're still participating at 47% in comparison to white students who are participating at a rate of 70%, or Asian students who are participating at a rate of 76%. You saw tremendous growth for students with IEPs. I do think that when you talk about students with IEPs, that data can be disaggregated beyond the IEP. So if we're talking about like do we see disproportionality in terms of IEP relationship to race? Are Black students with IEPs just as likely to participate as, say, our Hispanic students with IEPs, as, say, our white students with IEPs? That being said, we saw a 16% increase, right? Like that's a tremendous increase in participation and achievement. And we saw an increase for everybody in participation from 5% to 13% to 6% to 19% and 16%. So I wanna say that one, I really appreciate this chart and the inclusivity of this chart. And I also really appreciate that we are being mindful of who is participating and to what extent. And I'm wondering what our goals are in terms of continuing that trend or sustaining that success. And how we are differentiating our approaches to certain student groups, because I don't think it's a coincidence that the results look different for different groups of students. I don't think it's a coincidence that Black students saw the most growth. I think that aligns with conversations we've had around Black excellence. It aligns with, you know, kind of our goals around all students thriving in our school system, and our long-term conversation around reconciling the achievement gap. Can you all talk a little bit about what that should look like? So this data tracks the last 4 years. What does that mean for the next 4 years? How does this indicate where we're going?
So the first thing that I'll say is just the access to the mechanism of conferring credit is kind of the first barrier that we're trying to overcome. So we mentioned earlier that the AP exam, just making sure that all students are going to look at it, which means that we have to find or we have to not only communicate value, make sure that the students are aware of how to sign up, but we also need to bridge a financial gap. The price of AP went up from like $90 to $125 or something like that. And so there is a financial burden that we need to cover. For early college, the problem is typically one of transportation. Schools that are closer to a campus are easier to get to. Students that have cars can get to campus even easier. And we know that there are a variety of a number of students that would take an early college course, but are unable to get to campus. And so in order to combat that, there's a few things that we are trying. One of the things that is helping is the availability of summer courses at Madison College. So instead of having to travel to school and then to a Madison College site, opening up Start College Now courses over the summer, trying to build MMSD specific cohorts so that you're more likely to be in the same cohort with some of your classmates, some of your friends, find some transportation available that way. And just have it on like the regular schedule, so there's not like doubling up of days that you would need to be going. And then also looking at the mechanisms that we have available to us to expand the courses that are happening within our high schools. So some of that is ensuring that like the next several years, it's getting more of our teachers credentialed to be dual credit teachers, which is very easy to say. I think every single school district in the nation is saying we'll get our teachers dual credit eligible, but that requires additional schooling oftentimes, or sometimes like an externship, which is hard. But we have some embedded MMSD staff with our health programs, the extent to which we can expand that with like a phlebotomy program going into will be helpful. And then finally, okay, so we have access, but that doesn't mean attainment. We've been talking to Madison College about how we can embed like some of their college tutors in some of these courses who are familiar with the curriculum, who can be of support within a dual credit classroom so that we have the maximum attainment rate. All of those strategies aren't going to solve the problem, but they're going to get us closer.
I really appreciate that breakdown and explanation. I also think about how you disaggregate based on subject. And so if our girls are more likely to be advanced in certain areas and our boys are more likely to be advanced in other areas, I don't know if this graph necessarily gets us to that. And when I looked at specifically calculus and who was earning college credit for it last year, I was deeply disturbed by what that says about who we are saying is talented or advanced in the area of mathematics. The last thing I want to say is we've talked a lot about resources as an indicator of whether or not a student has these opportunities. I was talking to a student today, just like a truly like brilliant young person at a conference. And she got into a university and said, you know, the thing that was really like, actually, you posted about this too. I don't know if you saw the same kid at Madison 365's Leadership Summit. But the thing that was really keeping her from accepting, wasn't sure if she was gonna be able to afford to go there. I knew from the moment I entered school that being able to afford certain aspects of my education was gonna be really challenging for my family. I think a lot of kids have that throughout their educational experience, carry that weight of, even if I do a really good job, I'm not sure if this is for me or something I can access. I do think there's a part of this that is about saving money, right? If you enter college as a sophomore, that saves your family a significant amount of money. And I do think that that is something that we need to emphasize to our students and their families. If you are worried about your ability to afford college, then going to college for free while you are in high school is an exceptional opportunity. And it would have meant the world to me as a young person had somebody highlighted that that was even an option. So that's my final, it's my soapbox, and I'll be off of it now. Any further discussion from board members? Lisa, do you wanna end us out for tonight?
I think there's lots just to unpack here. Mitch, I want to thank you for your, the level of detail and just the, right, the real world application of this to how our children show up, right? How our high school kids access, we don't. And I think there's lots to talk about here as we think about a different way that our students can experience high school in terms of flexibility, in terms of start time, in terms of what will challenge the status quo in the high school. I think that's a really big deal. Dr. McCray and I went and visited our jail school today, how those students experience coursework, how they experience challenge and rigor. It was really, really moving. So I'm hopeful that what we're talking about tonight will have an impact on the way that our students experience high school.
Thank you all for joining us for this conversation this evening and for your leadership in this area. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
I'll second.
all those in favor? All right, thanks so much, y'all.